Imagine a world where a single insult sparks the collapse of an empire, or a simple miscalculation sends millions to their deaths. History isn't just a story of grand victories or brilliant minds. It's a tapestry woven with mistakes, misjudgments, and moments of human folly that ripple across centuries. These aren't just errors, they're turning points that reshaped civilizations, redrew maps, and altered the fate of humanity. Today, we're diving into the first part of an epic journey through the mistakes that changed history forever. From a diplomatic blunder that unleashed a Mongol storm to a bear that nearly triggered nuclear war, these stories will leave you stunned at how fragile the threads of history really are. Let's start with one of the most devastating mistakes in human history, insulting Genghis Khan's diplomats. In the early 1200s, the Mongol Empire, led by the fearsome Genghis Khan, was a rising power. The Mongols were at peace with the Khwarezmian Empire, a vast state stretching across Central Asia and Persia. The two powers had even fought side by side against common enemies, their relationship built on cautious respect. But in 1218, a Mongol trade caravan entered Khwarezmian territory, only to be attacked by a local governor named Inalchuk. He didn't just rob the caravan, he slaughtered the merchants, sending a clear message of disrespect. Genghis Khan, known for his strategic patience, didn't immediately retaliate. Instead, he sent a delegation of ambassadors to the Khwarezmian Shah, Muhammad II, demanding justice and the punishment of the governor. What happened next was catastrophic. Shah Muhammad made a choice that would echo through history. Instead of apologizing or handing over the guilty governor, he doubled down. He ordered one of the Mongol envoys executed and had his head sent back to Genghis Khan, while the others were humiliated, their beards shaved, a grave insult in Mongol culture. To the Mongols, harming a messenger wasn't just rude, it was a declaration of war. Genghis Khan, enraged, unleashed his full military might. In 1219, he launched an invasion that obliterated the Khwarezmian Empire. Cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, once thriving centers of culture, were reduced to ash. Millions perished. Some estimates suggest up to 15% of the global population at the time. The Mongols didn't stop there. Their conquests surged westward, devastating Persia, the Middle East, and even reaching Eastern Europe. Had the Shah simply punished the governor, this catastrophe might have been avoided. At the time, the Mongols were preoccupied with wars in China. One reckless decision turned a regional dispute into one of the deadliest campaigns in history. Now, let's fast forward to a mistake that could have ended the world as we know it, the nuclear bear. It's October 1962, the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the United States and the Soviet Union stood on the brink of nuclear war. At a U.S. military base in Duluth, Minnesota, around midnight, a guard spotted a shadowy figure climbing the perimeter fence. Tensions were sky high, and U.S. military planners feared Soviet sabotage could precede a nuclear strike. The guard, acting on instinct, fired his weapon and triggered the sabotage alarm. This alert automatically sounded at nearby bases, signaling a potential attack. But at Folk Field in Wisconsin, a wiring error turned a routine alarm into a full-blown crisis. Instead of a sabotage warning, a klaxon siren blared, the signal for nuclear-armed fighter jets to take off. The pilots on DEFCON 3, the highest alert level short of war, believed World War III had begun. They were explicitly told no practice drills would occur at this stage, so the siren meant only one thing: launch. Jets loaded with nuclear warheads taxied toward the runway, ready to strike Soviet targets. In those heart-stopping moments, the world teetered on the edge of annihilation. Fortunately, a quick-thinking officer at Folk Field realized something was wrong. He jumped into a car, sped onto the runway, and signaled the pilots to stand down just as they prepared for takeoff. The intruder? Not a Soviet saboteur, but a bear. A single bear, climbing a fence, nearly triggered a nuclear holocaust. This chilling incident, buried in military records for years, shows how close humanity came to disaster over a simple mistake. Let's shift gears to a betrayal that reshaped an empire. In 774, Byzantine Emperor Constantine V was locked in a bitter struggle with Bulgaria. His campaigns against the Bulgarians had faltered, but he held a secret advantage: a network of spies embedded in the Bulgarian court at Pliska. These agents fed him critical intelligence, giving him an edge over his rival, the Bulgarian ruler Telerig. But Telerig grew suspicious. Constantine always seemed one step ahead. thwarting Bulgarian plans with uncanny precision. Realizing his court was compromised, Telerik hatched a cunning plan. He sent a message to Constantine, claiming he wished to defect to Constantinople and join the Byzantine cause. To ensure his safety, he asked for the names of Constantine's spies in Pliska. Constantine, perhaps too trusting or desperate for an ally, took the bait. He sent Telerik a list of his agents, but Telerik had no intention of defecting. The moment he received the names, he rounded up and executed every Byzantine spy in his court. In one stroke, he dismantled Constantine's entire intelligence network. The loss was devastating. Without his spies, Constantine's ability to outmaneuver the Bulgarians crumbled, weakening the Byzantine Empire's position in the region. This single act of deception turned the tide, proving that a clever lie can be as powerful as an army. Now, let's travel to 1453, to the fall of Constantinople, a moment that marked the end of an empire over 1,000 years old. The Byzantine Empire, a shadow of its former glory, was under siege by the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II. Enter Orban, a Hungarian engineer with a revolutionary idea. A massive cannon called the Basilica, so large it required 60 oxen to move. Orban first offered his services to Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI, but the cash-strapped empire couldn't afford his ambitious project. Rejected, Orban turned to Mehmed II, who eagerly funded the engineer's work. In just 3 months, Orban built the Basilica, a weapon that could hurl massive stone balls over a mile, shattering Constantinople's ancient walls. When the Ottoman siege began in 1453, the Basilica proved decisive. The city's defenses, once thought impregnable, crumbled under the relentless bombardment. Constantinople fell, ending the Byzantine Empire and shifting the balance of power in Europe and the Middle East. The Ottomans established Istanbul as their capital, and the region became a hub of Islamic culture. If Constantine XII had found a way to fund Orban's work, the city might have held out, and the Byzantine Empire could have survived longer. One financial misstep changed the course of history, proving that even a lack of resources can be a fatal mistake. Let's end this first part with a mistake that's almost comical in its consequences. Kim Jong-nam's Disneyland trip. In 2001, Kim Jong-nam, the eldest son of North Korean leader Kim Jong-il, was seen as a potential successor. He held high-ranking positions in North Korea's government, overseeing critical areas like public security and IT development. But then, in a bizarre turn of events, he was caught in Japan using a forged passport. His destination? Tokyo Disneyland. Yes, the heir to North Korea's secretive regime risked it all for a theme park visit. The incident humiliated the Kim regime, forcing Kim Jong-il to cancel a planned trip to China. Jong-nam's fall from grace was swift. Disgraced, he was sidelined and eventually lived in exile, moving between China, Macau, and Southeast Asia. His open lifestyle and rumored ties to foreign intelligence, including the CIA, made him a liability. When his younger half-brother, Kim Jong-un, took power in 2010, Jong-nam became a target. In 2017, he was assassinated in Kuala Lumpur's airport with VX nerve agent, a killing widely attributed to Kim Jong-un. Jong-nam's Disneyland misadventure didn't just cost him his position, it set off a chain of events that ended in his death and solidified Kim Jong-un's grip on power. A trip to a theme park, of all things, altered the course of North Korea's leadership. These stories, Genghis Khan's insulted diplomats, a bear mistaken for a Soviet saboteur, a Byzantine emperor's misplaced trust, a rejected engineer, and a Disneyland fiasco, show us how the smallest mistakes can have monumental consequences. A single decision, a moment of carelessness, or a lapse in judgment can reshape empires, end lives, or bring the world to the brink of destruction. History isn't just written by heroes and villains, it's shaped by human error, by the moments when we stumble and the world shifts beneath our feet. That's it for part 1, but we're just getting started. In the next part, we'll explore more mistakes that turned the tide of history, from a wrong turn that sparked World War I to a press conference that brought down the Berlin Wall. If you're hooked, drop a comment with your favorite story so far, and let me know what you think the biggest mistake in history might be. Stay tuned because the past has plenty more surprises in store. We're back with more stories of human errors that didn't just trip us up, they reshaped the world. In part 1, We saw how insulting Genghis Khan's diplomats triggered a Mongol rampage and how a bear nearly sparked nuclear war. Now, we're diving deeper into the mistakes that turned history upside down, from a wrong turn that ignited World War I to a press conference that tore down the Berlin Wall. These moments remind us how fragile the balance of history can be, and how one slip can change everything. Let's start with a mistake so small it's almost absurd, yet it set off one of the deadliest conflicts in history, a wrong turn in Sarajevo. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was visiting Sarajevo, a city simmering with tension. A group of assassins, part of the Black Hand, planned to kill him to spark a rebellion against Austro-Hungarian rule. That morning, their first attempt, a bomb thrown at the Archduke's motorcade, failed, injuring officers but leaving Franz Ferdinand unharmed. For safety, his drivers were told to change the route, but the message didn't reach the lead car. By pure chance, the Archduke's vehicle turned down a side street, right where one of the assassins, Gavrilo Princip, was standing. Princip, who had given up after the botched bomb attack, was grabbing a sandwich at a cafe, likely thinking the plot was over. But when the Archduke's car stalled just feet away, he seized the moment. Pulling out his pistol, he shot Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie, at point-blank range. The assassination set off a diplomatic avalanche. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, triggering alliances that pulled Russia, Germany, France, and Britain into the fray. What could have been a local conflict exploded into World War I, killing over 16 million people and redrawing the map of Europe. If the driver had taken the right route, or if the car hadn't stalled, the war might have been delayed or avoided entirely. A single wrong turn changed the 20th century. Now, let's jump to a mistake that brought down a symbol of division with a single word. In 1989, the Berlin Wall stood as a stark divide between East and West Germany, a physical barrier of the Cold War. East Germany's government, under pressure from growing protests, was quietly discussing plans to ease travel restrictions to West Germany, but the details were supposed to stay secret until the next day. Enter Günter Schabowski, an East German official and the unofficial spokesperson for the ruling Politburo. On November 9, 1989, during a live press conference, Schabowski was asked about the new travel rules. Shuffling through his papers, he couldn't find a clear answer on when they'd take effect. Off the cuff, he said, "As far as I know, immediately." That word, immediately, changed everything. East Berliners, watching the broadcast, heard it as a signal that the border was open for the first time in 28 years. Crowds surged to the Berlin Wall, overwhelming the confused border guards, who had no orders to open the gates but had also heard the press conference. Faced with thousands of people, they relented, lifting the barriers. By 11:30 p.m., the wall was falling. East and West Berliners celebrated together, climbing the wall, hugging and crossing freely. Some historians argue Schabowski knew the weight of his words. Others say he simply misread the room. Either way, his slip accelerated the collapse of East Germany and marked a turning point in the Cold War. One word, spoken in haste, tore down a wall that had divided a nation for decades. Let's shift to a mistake that doomed a Roman ambition. In 9 AD, Publius Quinctilius Varus, a Roman general, was tasked with governing the newly conquered province of Germania. Among his officers was Arminius, a Germanic noble raised in Rome and trained in its military. Varus trusted Arminius, seeing him as a loyal ally, but Arminius was secretly uniting the Germanic tribes to resist Roman rule. That summer, as Varus led 15,000 to 20,000 Roman soldiers through the dense Teutoburg forest, Arminius fed him false intelligence about a minor rebellion nearby. Trusting his officer, Varus diverted his army into the forest, where the terrain was treacherous and Roman formations couldn't maneuver. It was a trap. Arminius had rallied the tribes, who ambushed the Romans over several days. Rain-soaked and stretched thin, the legions were slaughtered. Varus, realizing his mistake, took his own life during the battle. Nearly the entire Roman force was wiped out, and the loss was so catastrophic that Rome abandoned its plans to conquer beyond the Rhine River. The legion's numbers, 17, 18, and 19, were retired, never used again. The Germanic tribes, emboldened by their victory, later contributed to the pressures that weakened the Western Roman Empire. Varus's trust in Arminius didn't just cost lives, it halted Rome's expansion and shaped the future of Europe. Now, let's explore a mistake that turned a good intention into an ecological disaster. China's Four Pests campaign. In 1958, as part of Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward, China launched a campaign to eradicate four pests: rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows, blamed for spreading disease and damaging crops. The focus on sparrows, particularly the Eurasian tree sparrow, was especially aggressive. Propaganda rallied millions, including children, to destroy nets, smash eggs, and bang pots to keep sparrows from landing until they dropped dead from exhaustion. The campaign nearly wiped out sparrows across China, hailed as a triumph of human control over nature. But nature fought back. Without sparrows, insect populations, especially locusts, exploded. With no natural predators, these pests devoured crops, worsening food shortages. Combined with poor agricultural policies and environmental mismanagement, the campaign contributed to the Great Chinese Famine, which killed tens of millions between 1959 and 1961. By 1960, the government quietly reversed course, targeting bedbugs instead. Mao's belief that humans could dominate nature backfired spectacularly, turning a well-meaning policy into one of the deadliest mistakes in history. The sparrow slaughter showed how disrupting an ecosystem can spiral into catastrophe. Let's close this part with a mistake that seemed like a brilliant idea at the time, but left a toxic legacy. Thomas Midgley Jr.'s inventions. In 1921, while working for General Motors, Midgley discovered that adding tetraethyl lead, or TEL, to gasoline prevented engine knocking, improving car performance. Despite early signs of danger, factory workers suffered hallucinations, insanity, and even death from lead exposure. TL was marketed globally as a miracle fuel additive. By the 1920s, leaded gasoline was standard, poisoning air and soil for decades. In the late 1920s, Midgley struck again, helping develop Freon, the first chlorofluorocarbon CFC, used in refrigerators, aerosols, and inhalers. It was hailed as a safe, revolutionary coolant. Years after Midgley's death, scientists discovered CFCs were destroying the ozone layer, which shields Earth from harmful UV radiation. Leaded gasoline was linked to widespread health issues, including neurological damage in children. Both inventions, initially celebrated, caused environmental havoc, leading to global bans on CFCs and phased-out leaded fuel. Tragically, Midgley's story ended with another mistake. Paralyzed by polio in 1944, he designed a pulley system to move himself in and out of bed. One day, he became entangled in the ropes and was strangled to death. Some speculate it was suicide, but either way, Midgley's life and work left a mark on the planet like no other. A historian once said he had a greater impact on Earth's atmosphere than any single human, a legacy built on unintended consequences. These stories, a wrong turn in Sarajevo, a press conference slip, a misplaced trust in Germania, a war on sparrows, and a toxic fuel, reveal how mistakes, big or small, can rewrite history. A driver's error sparked a world war. A single word toppled a wall. A general's trust halted an empire. A campaign against birds starved millions. An inventor's solutions poisoned the planet. Each moment shows how human error can shift the course of civilizations, leaving lessons we're still learning today. That's part 2, but we're only halfway through this journey. In part 3, we'll uncover more mistakes that changed the world, from a submarine's capture that cracked Nazi codes to a treaty that fueled another war. Drop a comment with your thoughts on these stories, or guess what mistake we'll cover next. If you're loving this, hit subscribe and join us for the next chapter. The past is full of surprises, and we're just getting warmed up. We're deep into our exploration of the mistakes that turned history on its head. In part 2, we saw how a wrong turn sparked World War I and a press conference brought down the Berlin Wall. Now, in part 3, we're diving into 5 more pivotal errors, from a submarine's capture that cracked Nazi codes to a defensive strategy that crumbled under pressure. These stories show how a single misstep can shift the course of wars, empires, and even the planet itself. Let's get started. First up, a mistake that gave the Allies a secret weapon in World War II, the capture of German U-110. In May 1941, the German submarine U-110 was prowling the North Atlantic, sinking Allied ships with deadly precision. On its second mission, after damaging several vessels, it was hunted by British warships as part of Operation Primrose. Hit by depth charges, U-110 was forced to surface, surrounded by Allied ships. The German crew, led by Commander Fritz Julius Lemp, surrendered, but Lemp realized the sub wasn't sinking as planned. He tried to swim back to destroy the Enigma machine, a device used to encrypt Nazi military communications, but he vanished, likely drowned or shot. The British boarded the abandoned sub and seized the Enigma machine, along with codebooks and cipher settings. This haul was a game changer. The captured materials gave codebreakers at Bletchley Park a massive advantage, allowing them to decrypt German naval messages, including the critical reserve hand cipher. To keep their success secret, the British let U-110 sink, pretending it went down with everything intact. The decrypted messages helped the Allies track U-boat movements, saving countless ships and lives. Without Lemp's failure to scuttle the sub properly, the Battle of the Atlantic might have dragged on, costing the Allies dearly. One submarine's capture, born of a commander's mistake, turned the tide of the war. Now, let's travel to a mistake that doomed France's defenses, the Maginot Line. After World War I, France, scarred by the devastation of trench warfare, built the Maginot Line, a massive network of fortifications along its border with Germany. Constructed in the 1930s, it featured underground bunkers, heavy artillery, and thick concrete walls, designed to slow a German invasion and protect French soil. France, with fewer soldiers due to wartime losses, relied on this defensive strategy, especially as Germany rearmed and allies like Britain and the US seemed unreliable. But the line had a fatal flaw. It didn't fully cover the Ardennes forest or the Belgian border, areas deemed too rugged for a large-scale attack. In 1940, Germany proved them wrong. Instead of assaulting the Maginot Line head-on, the Nazis bypassed it, blitzing through Belgium and the Ardennes with tanks and troops. The line's fortifications held firm where attacked, but they were irrelevant once outflanked. France fell in 6 weeks, a humiliating defeat that led to Nazi occupation. The Maginot Line wasn't meant to be impregnable, but its planners underestimated Germany's boldness and mobility. Critics later debated its value, but one thing was clear: misjudging the enemy's strategy left France vulnerable. Reshaping the early years of World War II, a defensive masterpiece undone by a strategic oversight, became a symbol of false security. Let's shift to a mistake that fueled a global conflict: the Treaty of Versailles' harsh terms. Signed in 1919 after World War I, the treaty aimed to secure peace but instead sowed the seeds of another war. Germany was forced to accept full blame for the war, cede territory, shrink its military, and pay crippling reparations, equivalent to billions today. Many Germans saw these terms as deeply unfair, expecting negotiations based on U.S. President Wilson's more lenient 14 points. Economist John Maynard Keynes called it a Carthaginian peace, warning that crushing Germany would destabilize Europe. He was right. The treaty's humiliations, loss of land, military restrictions, and economic burdens fueled resentment. Millions of ethnic Germans now lived outside Germany's redrawn borders, stoking nationalist anger. During the Great Depression, this frustration propelled Adolf Hitler and the Nazis to power, who capitalized on the treaty's perceived injustices. While not the sole cause of World War II, the treaty's harshness created a fertile ground for extremism. Had the Allies offered more balanced terms, Germany's path might have been different, potentially averting the rise of Nazism. A peace meant to end all wars instead planted the roots of another, proving that vengeance can backfire spectacularly. Now, let's explore a mistake that turned a quick victory into a catastrophic defeat. Operation Barbarossa. In June 1941, Nazi Germany launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union, expecting to crush the Red Army in weeks. Codenamed Barbarossa, it was the largest military operation in history, with over 3 million troops. Early successes were staggering. German forces encircled hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers at Kiev and the Sea of Azov, advancing toward Leningrad and Moscow. But Hitler and his generals made critical errors. They underestimated Soviet resilience, overestimated their own supply lines, and ignored the brutal Russian winter. By late 1941, the invasion stalled. Leningrad endured a horrific siege, killing over 1 million civilians. Near Moscow, German troops came within sight of the Kremlin, but were repelled by a Soviet counterattack. bolstered by Siberian reinforcements. Harsh weather, stretched logistics, and fierce resistance bled the German army dry, with over 800,000 casualties by year's end. Hitler's decision to take personal control worsened matters, leading to poor strategic choices. Barbarossa's failure marked a turning point in World War II, shifting momentum to the Soviets, who later pushed west, shaping the Cold War's Eastern Bloc. A plan for a swift triumph, undone by hubris and miscalculation, became Germany's downfall. Let's end this part with a mistake that handed the Allies a strategic windfall: Russia's sale of Alaska. In 1867, Russia sold Alaska to the United States for $7.2 million, about 2 cents per acre. After losing the Crimean War, Russia feared it couldn't defend Alaska against Britain, whose Canadian forces were nearby. Selling to the US was a strategic move to block British expansion and gain funds. At the time, many Americans ridiculed the deal, dubbed Seward's Folly after Secretary of State William Seward, calling Alaska a frozen wasteland, but they couldn't have been more wrong. Alaska proved a treasure trove of resources: oil, gold, timber, and minerals, while its location gave the US a critical foothold in the Pacific. Spanning over twice the size of Texas, it became a strategic asset during the Cold War and beyond. Russia's decision, driven by short-term fears, costed a region that could have bolstered its global influence. Had Russia held on to Alaska, the geopolitical landscape, from resource wealth to Arctic dominance, might look very different today. A sale seen as pragmatic at the time became one of history's great missed opportunities. These stories, the capture of U-110, the Maginot Line's flaws, the Treaty of Versailles' harshness, Barbarossa's overreach, and Alaska's sale, show how mistakes can ripple across time. A submarine's failure handed the Allies a code-breaking edge. A defensive line's gaps left France exposed. A vengeful treaty fueled a dictator's rise. An invasion's hubris reshaped a war. A sale dismissed as minor lost a strategic goldmine. Each error, whether tactical, diplomatic, or strategic, proves that history hinges on human fallibility. That's part 3, but we're not done yet. In part 4, we'll uncover the final set of mistakes that changed history, from Columbus's miscalculation to Alexander's missing heir. Drop a comment with your favorite story from this part, or predict what's coming next. If you're hooked, hit subscribe and join us for the finale. The past has more lessons to teach, and we're racing toward the end of this epic journey. We've reached the final leg of our journey through the mistakes that changed history forever. In part 3, we explored how a captured submarine turned the tide of World War II and how the Maginot Line's flaws left France vulnerable. Now, in part 4, we're diving into 5 more pivotal errors, from a navigational blunder that discovered a new world to a defensive misjudgment that sealed an invasion success. These stories reveal how human error, whether born of ignorance, arrogance, or oversight, can rewrite the fate of civilizations. Let's dive in. First, let's sail back to 1492 with Christopher Columbus's monumental miscalculation. At the time, scholars like Eratosthenes had already estimated the Earth's size with remarkable accuracy, but Columbus rejected their findings. He believed the Earth was much smaller and that Asia extended farther east than it did. Based on this flawed math, he argued that Japan was just a few weeks' sail west from Europe. Most experts dismissed his plan, warning the journey would be far too long. But Columbus's confidence and his miscalculations convinced the Spanish crown to fund his voyage. In October 1492, instead of reaching Asia, he stumbled upon the Americas, a continent unknown to Europeans. If Columbus had used the correct measurements, the trip would have seemed too risky, and he likely never would have sailed. His error led to the age of exploration, European colonization, and centuries of cultural exchange and conflict. The Americas' discovery reshaped global trade, populations, and power dynamics. Entire civilizations rose and fell because of one man's bad math. Columbus's mistake didn't just find a new world, it changed the course of history, proving that even a colossal error can lead to world-altering consequences. Now, let's leap to 323 BC, when Alexander the Great's failure to name an heir shattered his empire. By his death at age 32, Alexander had built the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from Greece to India, but he left no clear successor. His only direct heir was an unborn child, and his half-brother, Aridaeus, had severe mental disabilities. Without a plan, his top generals, known as the Diadochi, scrambled for power. What followed was the Wars of the Diadochi, nearly 50 years of brutal conflict. These former allies betrayed and battled each other, carving up Alexander's empire into rival kingdoms. The chaos saw most of Alexander's royal family, including his son Alexander IV, murdered in the power struggles. By 281 BC, the empire had splintered into competing states, like the Seleucid and Ptolemaic kingdoms. Alexander's dream of a unified empire connecting east and west died with him. The fragmentation paved the way for Rome's rise in centuries of regional conflict. Had he named a strong successor, his empire might have endured, altering the ancient world's trajectory. One man's oversight, failing to plan for the future, tore apart the greatest empire of its time. Let's shift to a mistake that fueled Germany's defeat on D-Day: the Nazis' strategic indecision. In 1944, as the Allies prepared to invade Nazi-occupied Europe, German commanders were divided. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt believed the invasion would hit Pas de Calais, the closest point between Britain and France, offering ports and a direct route to Germany. Erwin Rommel, overseeing coastal defenses, also focused on Calais, but warned that Normandy was a possibility. Hitler, unable to decide, split his tank divisions, placing some too far inland to reinforce Rommel quickly, but not far enough to serve as Rundstedt's mobile reserve. The Allies' deception, Operation Fortitude, further convinced Germany that Calais was the target. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy. Rommel was away for his wife's birthday, and bad weather forecasts left other officers off guard. Rundstedt requested reinforcements, but Hitler delayed, still believing Normandy was a diversion. Allied air forces crippled German supply lines, and by the time a counterattack was approved, it was too late. The Allies secured 5 beachheads, landing over 150,000 troops. Rommel later warned Hitler that Germany's defenses were collapsing, but the Führer refused to listen. A month later, Rommel was injured in an Allied air attack, further weakening German command. Indecision and deception handed the Allies a foothold in Europe, sealing Germany's fate. A split strategy and delayed response turned D-Day into a turning point of World War II. Now, let's explore a mistake that left an empire vulnerable: Rome's trust in a Germanic noble. In 9 AD, Publius Quinctilius Varus, a Roman general, governed the province of Germania, relying on Arminius, a Germanic noble trained in Rome. Unbeknownst to Varus, Arminius was secretly uniting tribes against Roman rule. That summer, as Varus led 15,000 to 20,000 troops through the Teutoburg forest, Arminius reported a small rebellion nearby. Trusting him, Varus diverted his army into the dense, rain-soaked forest, where Roman formations were useless. Arminius sprang his trap, ambushing the legions with Germanic warriors who knew the terrain. Over several days, the Romans were slaughtered. Varus, realizing his betrayal, committed suicide during the battle. The loss was catastrophic. 3 legions were annihilated, and Rome abandoned its plans to conquer beyond the Rhine. The destroyed legions' numbers were retired, and Emperor Augustus halted expansion into northern Germany. The Germanic tribes, emboldened, later contributed to the pressures that weakened the Western Roman Empire. Varus's blind trust in Arminius didn't just cost lives, it redrew the boundaries of Rome's ambition, shaping Europe's future. Finally, let's end with a mistake that set the stage for World War II: the Treaty of Versailles' harsh terms. Signed in 1919, the treaty ended World War I, but imposed punishing conditions on Germany. It forced Germany to accept sole blame, cede 13% of its territory, limit its military to 100,000 troops, and pay massive reparations, equivalent to $400 billion today. Germans felt betrayed, expecting terms based on Wilson's 14 points. Economist John Maynard Keynes warned that the treaty's Carthaginian peace would destabilize Europe by crushing Germany's economy and pride. The treaty's humiliations, lost land, military restrictions, and economic hardship fueled resentment. Millions of ethnic Germans now lived outside Germany's borders, amplifying nationalist fervor. During the Great Depression, this anger propelled Adolf Hitler and the Nazis to power, who exploited the treaty's injustices to rally support. While not the only cause, the treaty created conditions ripe for extremism. Had the Allies pursued a fairer peace, Germany's path might have avoided Nazism, potentially preventing the war that killed millions. A treaty meant to secure peace instead planted the seeds of conflict, proving that vengeance can backfire with devastating consequences. These stories, Columbus's miscalculation, Alexander's missing heir, Germany's D-Day indecision, Rome's betrayed trust, and the Treaty of Versailles' harshness, show how mistakes shape history's course. A wrong estimate discovered a continent. A lack of succession shattered an empire. A split strategy lost a war. A misplaced trust halted Rome's expansion. A vengeful treaty ignited another conflict. Each error, whether born of ignorance or arrogance, reminds us that history is fragile, built on the choices and missteps of those who came before. That's the end of our 4-part journey through the mistakes that changed history forever. From Genghis Khan's insulted diplomats to a bear that nearly triggered nuclear war, we've seen how the smallest errors can have the biggest consequences. If you love this series, drop a comment with your favorite story or suggest another mistake we should explore. Hit subscribe, share with a friend, and join our Discord to keep the conversation going. History is a story of triumphs and failures, and it's the failures that often teach us the most. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, picture this. A single wrong turn, a split-second mistake, and the world plunges into a war that kills millions, redraws maps, and reshapes history forever. One decision, one moment of chance, sparked the deadliest conflict of its time, World War I. How could something so small lead to such catastrophe? Buckle up, because we're diving into why one wrong decision started World War I, a story of missteps, alliances, and the fragile threads that hold nations together, or tear them apart. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. June 28, 1914, Sarajevo, a city simmering with tension, a powder keg waiting for a spark. On this sunny morning, one wrong decision would ignite a chain reaction that plunged the world into chaos. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, wasn't just a murder, it was the domino that toppled empires, killed millions, and birthed the modern world. But how did a single moment, a driver's mistake, set off World War I? To understand, we need to unravel the tangled web of alliances, rivalries, and human errors that turned a local tragedy into a global catastrophe. This is part 1 of why one wrong decision started World War I, and we're starting at the heart of the storm. Sarajevo in 1914 was a city of clashing cultures, nestled in the Balkans, a region known as Europe's powder keg. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had annexed Bosnia in 1908, angering Serbia, a small but ambitious neighbor dreaming of a greater Slavic state. Serbian nationalists, especially the secretive Black Hand Group, saw Austria-Hungary as an oppressor, stifling their dreams of independence. Enter Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke, whose visit to Sarajevo was both a show of imperial strength and a provocation. He wasn't just a royal, he was a symbol of everything the Black Hand despised. His trip, planned to coincide with a Serbian national holiday, was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. The Black Hand saw their chance. A group of young conspirators, led by figures like Gavrilo Princip, plotted to assassinate the Archduke during his visit. They weren't seasoned killers, just idealistic, poorly trained youths armed with bombs, pistols, and a burning desire to strike a blow for Serbia. On the morning of June 28th, as Franz Ferdinand's motorcade rolled through Sarajevo's streets, the assassins lined the route, ready to act. The plan was chaotic from the start. Their leader, Danilo Ilic, had doubts about their readiness, but the group pressed forward, driven by passion more than precision. The first attempt came early. Nedeljko Čabrinović, one of the conspirators, hurled a bomb at the Archduke's open-top car. It missed, bouncing off the vehicle and exploding under a trailing car, injuring officers and bystanders. The blast shook the city and the motorcade sped to safety. Franz Ferdinand, rattled but unharmed, continued his schedule, heading to Sarajevo City Hall. The assassins scattered, their plan in disarray. Čabrinović was caught, and the others, including Princip, assumed the plot had failed. Princip, dejected, wandered off to a nearby cafe to grab a sandwich, thinking the day was lost. This is where fate and a single wrong decision stepped in. After the bomb attempt, Franz Ferdinand's security team decided to change the motorcade's route to avoid further attacks. The new plan was to take a safer path along the Miljacka River, avoiding the crowded streets where more assassins might lurk. But in the chaos, the message didn't reach the lead driver, Leopold Loika. As the motorcade left City Hall, Loika followed the original route, turning right onto Franz Joseph Street, a narrow road lined with buildings perfect for an ambush. The other drivers followed, unaware of the change. When the mistake was realized, the cars slowed to a crawl, and Loika began to reverse, stalling the engine right in front of Schiller's delicatessen. By sheer chance, Gavrilo Princip was standing there, sandwich in hand, having given up on the plot. He couldn't believe his eyes. The Archduke's car, stalled just feet away, with Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie exposed in the open-top vehicle. Princip didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, pulled his pistol, and fired 2 shots. One hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck, the other struck Sophie in the abdomen. Both were fatal. Within minutes, the couple was dead, and Princip was tackled by police. The assassination was over, but its consequences were just beginning. The news of Franz Ferdinand's death spread like wildfire. In Vienna, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was outraged. The Archduke wasn't universally loved. He was a reformer who wanted to restructure the empire into a federation, a plan that threatened the old guard, but his murder was a direct challenge to imperial authority. Austria-Hungary saw Serbia as the culprit, believing the Black Hand operated with government support. The empire's leaders, led by Emperor Franz Joseph and Foreign Minister Leopold Berchtold, demanded action, but they didn't act alone. The world in 1914 was a spiderweb of alliances, and one tug on a thread could unravel everything. Austria-Hungary turned to its ally, Germany, for support. Kaiser Wilhelm II, eager to assert Germany's power, offered a blank check, unconditional backing for whatever Austria-Hungary chose to do. This was a critical mistake. Germany's leaders assumed a swift, localized conflict would teach Serbia a lesson and strengthen their position in Europe. They didn't expect a wider war, but Serbia had its own ally, Russia, the protector of Slavic nations. Russia's Tsar Nicholas II, under pressure to maintain his empire's prestige, promised to defend Serbia if attacked. Russia, in turn, was allied with France, which harbored grudges against Germany from the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. France's ally, Britain, was less committed but bound by treaties to protect Belgium's neutrality. Back in Sarajevo, the wrong turn was just the spark. Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia on July 23, 1914, demanding harsh concessions, suppress anti-Austrian propaganda, allow Austrian officials to investigate the assassination, and crack down on nationalist groups. The demands were designed to be rejected, giving Austria-Hungary a pretext for war. Serbia, surprisingly, accepted most terms but balked at allowing foreign interference in its justice system, a point of national pride. Austria-Hungary declared it insufficient and, on July 28, 1914, declared war on Serbia. The dominoes began to fall. Russia mobilized its armies to support Serbia, alarming Germany. On July 30th, Germany demanded Russia halt its mobilization, but Russia refused. Germany declared war on Russia on August 1st, and then on France 2 days later, expecting a quick victory through its Schlieffen Plan, a strategy to crush France before turning east to Russia. To reach France, Germany invaded neutral Belgium, triggering Britain's entry into the war on August 4th. In just over a month, a wrong turn in Sarajevo had dragged Europe's great powers into conflict. The war that followed would kill over 16 million people, topple 4 empires, and reshape the world. But let's pause and zoom in on that fatal moment. Why did the driver's mistake matter so much? Leopold Loika wasn't a villain. He was a chauffeur caught in a chaotic day. The bomb attack had thrown the security team into disarray, and communication broke down. The Archduke's chief of security, Franz von Harrach, later admitted the route change was poorly coordinated. If Loika had been properly briefed, or if the car hadn't stalled, Princip might never have gotten his shot. The assassination could have been just another failed plot, like countless others in the Balkans. Instead, it became the match that lit the fuse. The Black Hand's role can't be ignored either. Their plan was sloppy, relying on inexperienced assassins with unreliable weapons. Yet their determination and luck made them deadly. Princip, a 19-year-old consumptive with no military training, became the unlikely fulcrum of history. His presence at that exact spot at that exact moment was a fluke. If he'd chosen a different cafe, or if the bomb attack had succeeded earlier, the Archduke might have survived. The fragility of that moment is staggering. One decision, one wrong turn, and the world spiraled into war. Let's consider the broader context. Europe in 1914 was a tinderbox. The great powers were armed to the teeth, their alliances rigid and their rivalries raw. Germany's naval race with Britain, France's desire for revenge, Russia's Slavic ambitions, and Hungary's struggle to control its diverse empire, created a system where any crisis could escalate. The wrong turn was the spark, but the fuel had been piling up for decades. Historians like Christopher Clark argue that no single nation was solely to blame. Each made choices that edged the world closer to conflict. Austria-Hungary's aggressive ultimatum, Germany's blank check, Russia's mobilization, all were decisions that could have gone differently. Yet the human element remains the heart of this story. Franz Ferdinand wasn't a warmonger. He wanted peace and reform. His death silenced a voice that might have reshaped the Austro-Hungarian Empire, perhaps preventing its collapse. Sophie, his wife, was a devoted mother whose death left their children orphaned. Princip imprisoned for life. He was too young for execution. Died of tuberculosis in 1918, never seeing the war's end. These personal tragedies, set against the backdrop of global upheaval, remind us that history isn't just about nations. It's about people making choices and sometimes mistakes. This is just the beginning. In part 1, we've seen how a driver's error in Sarajevo ignited a world war. But there's so much more to uncover. How did the great powers stumble into a conflict no one truly wanted? What other missteps fanned the flames? In part 2, we'll explore the diplomatic blunders, military miscalculations, and human failures that turned a local assassination into a global catastrophe. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Could this war have been avoided, or was it inevitable? Hit subscribe, and let's keep unraveling this story together. The past is calling, and it's got more surprises in store. The streets of Sarajevo are still echoing with the gunshots that killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914. A wrong turn by his driver, Leopold Loica, handed Gavrilo Princip, a young Serbian nationalist, the chance to strike a blow against the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But that fatal moment was just the beginning. The real disaster unfolded in the weeks that followed, as Europe's great powers, bound by alliances, driven by ambition, and blinded by miscalculations, stumbled into a war that would claim over 16 million lives. In part 1, we saw how a single mistake ignited the crisis. Now, in part 2, we're diving into the diplomatic blunders, reckless promises, and human errors that turned a local assassination into the Great War. This is the story of how one wrong decision after another set the world ablaze. Let's start with Vienna, where the Austro-Hungarian Empire was reeling from the Archduke's death. Franz Ferdinand wasn't just a royal. He was the heir to an empire of 50 million people, a patchwork of ethnic groups held together by fragile loyalty to Emperor Franz Joseph. His murder was a direct challenge to imperial authority, and the hawks in Vienna, led by Foreign Minister Leopold Berchtold and Chief of Staff Konrad von Hötzendorf, demanded retribution. They pointed the finger at Serbia, a small but defiant neighbor they suspected of backing the Black Hand, the group behind the assassination. Evidence of Serbia's involvement was thin. Some Black Hand members had ties to Serbian intelligence, but no direct government link was proven. Yet Austria-Hungary saw a chance to crush Serbia's growing influence in the Balkans and secure its own crumbling empire. Here's where the first major misstep comes in. Austria-Hungary didn't act alone. On July 5, 1914, Emperor Franz Joseph sent a letter to Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, seeking support for a punitive strike against Serbia. Germany, Austria. Hungary's closest ally, was eager to flex its muscles on the world stage. The Kaiser, a brash and impulsive leader, offered what became known as the blank check, unconditional German backing for whatever Austria-Hungary decided to do. This was a catastrophic error. Wilhelm and his advisors, including Chancellor Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg, believed a swift war against Serbia would be localized, a quick victory to bolster their ally and intimidate rivals. They underestimated the web of alliances that tied Europe together. The blank check emboldened Austria-Hungary to take a hardline stance, setting the stage for escalation. Meanwhile, in Belgrade, Serbia was caught off guard. The Serbian government, led by Prime Minister Nikola Pasic, had no direct role in the assassination, but knew of nationalist plots and had failed to curb them. Pasic was in a bind. Serbia's dream of a greater Slavic state depended on challenging Austria-Hungary, but a war could spell disaster. Serbia's hope lay in its powerful ally, Russia, the self-proclaimed protector of Slavic nations. Tsar Nicholas II, under pressure to maintain Russia's prestige after recent humiliations, assured Serbia of support. Russia's alliance with France, forged to counter Germany, meant any conflict could pull in more players. The stage was set for a diplomatic showdown, but no one seemed to grasp how quickly it could spiral. On July 23, 1914, Austria-Hungary delivered its ultimatum to Serbia, a list of 10 demands designed to be nearly impossible to accept. They included suppressing anti-Austrian propaganda, dissolving nationalist groups like the Black Hand, and allowing Austrian officials to investigate the assassination on Serbian soil. The ultimatum was a trap. Berchtold and his allies wanted Serbia to reject it, giving them a pretext for war. But Serbia's response, delivered just before the 48-hour deadline, was a surprise. Pasic agreed to most demands, even those that humiliated his government, but rejected the idea of Austrian officials operating in Serbia, calling it a violation of sovereignty. This partial refusal was Austria-Hungary's second major mistake. Instead of negotiating or accepting Serbia's concessions, Vienna declared the response inadequate and began mobilizing for war. The ultimatum's fallout was immediate. On July 25th, Austria-Hungary broke diplomatic relations with Serbia, and on July 28th it declared war. The first shells fell on Belgrade, marking the start of hostilities. But the real danger lay in the alliances now kicking into gear. Russia, honoring its pledge to Serbia, began partial mobilization on July 25th, targeting its forces along the Austro-Hungarian border. This alarmed Germany, which saw Russian mobilization as a threat to its eastern flank. On July 30th, Russia escalated to full mobilization, a move that Tsar Nicholas II later tried to reverse but couldn't. Germany issued an ultimatum demanding Russia stand down. When Russia refused, Germany declared war on August 1, 1914. Germany's next move was its third critical error, the Schlieffen Plan. Designed to avoid a two-front war, the plan called for a lightning strike through neutral Belgium to knock out France before turning east to face Russia's slower mobilizing army. German generals, led by Helmuth von Moltke, believed speed was their advantage, but invading Belgium on August 4th brought Britain into the war. Britain, bound by an 1839 treaty to protect Belgian neutrality, had wavered on joining the conflict but now had no choice. The German High Command had gambled that Britain would stay out, or at least delay. But the violation of Belgium's borders united British public opinion. Sir Edward Grey, Britain's Foreign Secretary, famously said, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." Let's pause and look at these decisions. Austria-Hungary's ultimatum was a deliberate provocation, but Serbia's near compliance could have opened a path to peace. Why didn't Vienna negotiate? Berchtold and Conrad were obsessed with crushing Serbia, fearing that any compromise would weaken their empire's grip on the Balkans. Germany's blank check was equally reckless. Kaiser Wilhelm, despite later urging restraint, had given Austria-Hungary a free hand, assuming Russia wouldn't risk war. Russia's mobilization meant to deter Austria-Hungary, instead panicked Germany, whose Schlieffen Plan required immediate action. Each power made choices based on misjudgments, overconfidence, and fear of losing face. The human element in these decisions is striking. Franz Joseph, 83 years old, was a weary emperor who had lost his son, wife, and now nephew to tragedy. His decision to back war was driven by duty to his empire, not bloodlust. Wilhelm II, nicknamed Kaiser Bill by his British cousins, was a volatile mix of insecurity and bravado, desperate to prove Germany's might. Nicholas II, a devoted family man, agonized over mobilization, but felt bound by honor to protect Serbia. These leaders weren't cartoon villains. They were flawed men navigating a crisis with incomplete information and immense pressure. Their advisors, from Berchtold's hawkishness to Moltke's rigid adherence to the Schlieffen Plan, amplified the mistakes. Consider the diplomats who failed to stop the slide. In the July crisis, telegrams flew between capitals, but misunderstandings abounded. Britain's Grey proposed a conference to mediate, but Austria, Hungary, and Germany dismissed it. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Sazonov, believed mobilization would scare off Austria-Hungary, not provoke Germany. Germany's Bethmann Hollweg later admitted he underestimated Britain's resolve. Communication was slow, telegraphs took hours, and ambassadors often acted on outdated instructions. In 1914, there was no hotline, no UN, no instant Zoom calls. The world's fate rested on ink, paper, and human judgment, and judgment faltered. Let's zoom out to the broader forces at play. Europe in 1914 was a cauldron of rivalries. Germany's rapid industrialization threatened Britain's dominance. France, still smarting from its 1871 defeat, dreamed of reclaiming Alsace-Lorraine. Russia faced internal unrest and needed foreign victories to shore up the Tsar's rule. Austria-Hungary, a multi-ethnic empire, feared nationalist movements like Serbia's could tear it apart. The alliance system, Germany and Austria, Hungary versus Russia, France, and Britain, meant any conflict could escalate. Add in the arms race with dreadnought battleships and machine guns, and Europe was a bomb waiting to explode. The wrong turn in Sarajevo was the spark, but these tensions were the fuel. Yet the war wasn't inevitable. Historians like Margaret Macmillan argue that choices made in July 1914 could have pulled Europe back from the brink. If Austria-Hungary had accepted Serbia's response, or if Germany had urged restraint, diplomacy might have prevailed. Russia's mobilization could have been limited, or Britain could have signaled its commitment earlier, deterring Germany's invasion of Belgium. Each nation believed it was acting defensively, but their collective actions created a tragedy of errors. The wrong decisions piled up: Vienna's ultimatum, Germany's blank check, Russia's mobilization, Germany's invasion, and the world paid the price. We're only halfway through this story. In part 2, we've seen how diplomatic blunders and reckless promises turned an assassination into a continental war. But what happened when the fighting began? How did military miscalculations and human failures deepen the catastrophe? In part 3, we'll explore the early battles, the trench warfare that defined the war, and the decisions that made peace impossible. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Was there a single moment when war could have been stopped? Hit subscribe, and let's keep unraveling this epic tale. The past is full of lessons, and we're just getting to the heart of it. The summer of 1914 has erupted into chaos. A wrong turn in Sarajevo sparked the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and a chain of diplomatic blunders, Germany's blank check, Austria-Hungary's ultimatum, Russia's mobilization, dragged Europe into war. By August, the great powers are locked in conflict: Germany and Austria, Hungary against Russia, France, and Britain. But the real tragedy of World War I unfolds on the battlefields, where military miscalculations, outdated strategies, and human failures turn a conflict into a meat grinder. In part 2, we saw how diplomacy failed to stop the war. Now, in part 3, we're diving into the early battles, the rise of trench warfare, and the decisions that made peace a distant dream. This is the story of how one wrong decision after another trapped the world in a nightmare. Let's start with Germany's grand gamble, the Schlieffen Plan. Designed to avoid a two-front war, the plan aimed to crush France in 6 weeks by sweeping through neutral Belgium, then pivot east to face Russia's slower mobilizing army. German Chief of Staff Helmuth von Moltke, tasked with executing the plan, believed speed and overwhelming force would deliver victory before the Allies could coordinate. But the plan was flawed from the start. Invading Belgium on August 4, 1914, brought Britain into the war, uniting public opinion against Germany. The Belgian army, though small, resisted fiercely, slowing German advances at battles like Liège. This was Germany's first misstep, underestimating Belgium's resolve and overestimating their own logistics. The German advance through Belgium was brutal but initially successful. By late August, German troops were closing in on Paris, pushing French and British forces back. The Allies, led by French General Joseph Joffre, were caught off guard by Germany's speed and numbers. But Moltke made a critical error. He diverted troops from the Western Front to reinforce the East against Russia, weakening his main thrust. This allowed the Allies to regroup at the First Battle of the Marne in September 1914. French and British forces using taxis to rush troops to the front, a desperate but iconic move, halted the German advance just 70 kilometers from Paris. The Germans retreated to the Aisne River, and both sides began digging trenches to hold their ground. This was the birth of trench warfare, a decision that defined World War I's horrors. Trenches weren't new, but their scale was unprecedented. By late 1914, a 400-mile network of trenches stretched from the North Sea to Switzerland, locking armies into a stalemate. Generals on both sides, trained for mobile warfare, misjudged how trenches would change the game. Machine guns, barbed wire, and artillery made frontal assault suicidal, yet commanders clung to outdated tactics. The British, under General Douglas Haig, and the Germans, led by Erich von Falkenhayn, repeatedly ordered charges into no man's land, where soldiers were mowed down by the thousands. The decision to prioritize offensive assaults over defensive strategy was a catastrophic mistake, costing millions of lives. Let's zoom in on the Eastern Front, where another miscalculation deepened the war. Russia, despite its massive army, was unprepared for modern warfare. Tsar Nicholas II's generals, like Nikolai Ruzsky, relied on sheer numbers rather than coordination. In August 1914, Russia launched an offensive into East Prussia, aiming to relieve pressure on France. But the Russian First and Second Armies, led by Paul von Rennenkampf and Alexander Samsonov, were poorly coordinated. German generals Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff exploited this, encircling the Russians at the Battle of Tannenberg. Nearly 150,000 Russian troops were killed or captured, and Samsonov, humiliated, committed suicide. Russia's hasty offensive, driven by loyalty to France, was a disaster that exposed its military weaknesses. Germany's victory at Tannenberg was a high point, but it masked another error: overconfidence. The Germans assumed Russia would collapse quickly, but the Tsar's empire, though battered, kept fighting. Russia's vast size and manpower allowed it to absorb losses that would have crippled smaller nations. By 1915, Germany and Austria-Hungary were bogged down in the east, facing a war of attrition they hadn't planned for. Austria-Hungary's own missteps compounded the problem. Its army under Konrad von Hotzendorf was ill-equipped and divided by ethnic tensions. Attacks against Serbia and Russia faltered, forcing Germany to divert resources to prop up its ally. The decision to rely on Austria-Hungary's shaky military was a German blunder that stretched their forces thin. Back in the West, the trenches became a symbol of futility. Soldiers lived in mud, rats, and constant fear, enduring artillery barrages and gas attacks. The Battle of Ypres in 1915 saw the first large-scale use of poison gas by Germany, a decision that escalated the war's brutality. The Allies retaliated with their own chemical weapons, turning the conflict into a race for ever deadlier technology. Generals on both sides misjudged the psychological toll of trench life, expecting troops to endure endless slaughter without breaking. Desertions and mutinies began to rise, yet commanders doubled down, ordering more offensives. The decision to keep fighting in trenches, despite staggering losses, was a collective failure of imagination and humanity. Let's focus on a specific blunder: the Battle of the Somme in 1916. British General Douglas Haig planned a massive offensive to break the German lines, believing a week-long artillery bombardment would destroy enemy defenses. On July 1, 1916, British troops went over the top, expecting little resistance. They were wrong. German machine gunners, sheltered in deep bunkers, emerged to mow down 60,000 British soldiers in a single day, the bloodiest in British military history. Haig's over-reliance on artillery and underestimation of German resilience turned the Somme into a 5-month slaughter, with over 1 million casualties on both sides for minimal gains. The decision to press the attack, despite clear failure, epitomized the war's senseless carnage. The human cost of these decisions was staggering. Soldiers like Wilfred Owen, a British poet, captured the horror in verses written from the trenches. Young men promised glory faced mud, blood, and despair. Officers, often safe behind the lines, issued orders that seemed detached from reality. In Germany, families mourned sons lost to feudal charges. In France, entire villages were wiped out. Russia's peasants, conscripted into a poorly led army, died in droves. The leaders, Haig, Falkenhayn, Joffre, weren't monsters, but their refusal to adapt to modern warfare's realities was a tragic error. They believed victory was just one push away, a delusion that prolonged the war. The war's global reach added another layer of mistakes. The Ottoman Empire, joining Germany and Austria-Hungary in 1914, miscalculated its ability to fight on multiple fronts. Its campaign in the Caucasus against Russia led to disaster at Sarikamish, where 60,000 Ottoman troops froze or died in the mountains. Britain's attempt to knock the Ottomans out at Gallipoli in 1915, led by Winston Churchill, was another fiasco. Poor planning and underestimation of Turkish defenses cost the Allies 250,000 casualties. These peripheral campaigns, meant to break the stalemate, only spread the war's misery, draining resources and lives. Diplomacy didn't fare much better. By 1915, secret negotiations began as leaders realized the war's cost. Britain and France lured Italy into the Allies with promises of territory in the 1915 Treaty of London, but Italy's entry stretched the war further. Germany's decision to resume unrestricted submarine warfare in 1917, sinking neutral ships, was a desperate bid to starve Britain. Instead, it provoked the United States, which joined the Allies in April 1917. President Woodrow Wilson had campaigned on neutrality, but Germany's gamble, misjudging American resolve, tipped the balance. Each attempt to gain an edge, from alliances to U-boats, backfired, entrenching the conflict. Let's reflect on why these decisions mattered. The Schlieffen Plan's failure locked Germany into a two-front war it couldn't sustain. Trench warfare's persistence turned soldiers into cannon fodder. Russia's rushed offensive and Austria-Hungary's weakness strained their allies. The Somme carnage showed the cost of stubbornness. Every choice reflected a deeper flaw. Leaders clung to old tactics, ignored new realities, and underestimated their enemies. The war wasn't just fought with guns, it was fought with decisions, and too many were wrong. We're nearing the end of this story, but the war's darkest moments are still ahead. In Part 3, we've seen how military blunders turned a conflict into a slaughter. In Part 4, we'll explore the war's final years, the revolutions it sparked, and the peace that sowed the seeds of another war. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Could better leadership have ended the war sooner? Hit subscribe, and let's finish this journey together. The past is a warning, and its lessons are still unfolding. The world is bleeding. By 1917, World War I has ground Europe into a stalemate of trenches, mud, and death. A wrong turn in Sarajevo sparked the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and a cascade of diplomatic and military blunders, Germany's blank check, Austria-Hungary's ultimatum, the Schlieffen Plan's failure, turned it into a global catastrophe. Millions are dead, empires are crumbling, and soldiers are broken by years of senseless slaughter. In Part 3, we saw how trench warfare and misjudgments like the Battle of the Somme defined the war's horror. Now, in Part 4, we dive into the final years, the revolutions that toppled monarchs, and the peace treaty that sowed the seeds of World War II. This is the story of how one wrong decision after another ended the Great War and set the stage for an even darker future. Let's start with 1917, a turning point marked by desperation and defiance. Germany, battered by the Allied blockade and facing starvation at home, made a fateful decision: resume unrestricted submarine warfare. In 1915, Germany had sunk neutral ships, including the Lusitania, killing 1,198 people and angering the United States. After protests, Germany paused the campaign, but by 1917, with Britain's navy choking their supply lines, German Admiral Henning von Holzendorf convinced Kaiser Wilhelm II to restart it. The goal was to starve Britain into surrender before the US could fully mobilize. It was a gamble, and a catastrophic mistake. On February 1st, 1917, Germany unleashed its U-boats, sinking any ship bound for Allied ports, neutral or not. This decision backfired spectacularly. The sinking of American ships like the Titanic and the deaths of US citizens reignited outrage across the Atlantic. President Woodrow Wilson, who had won re-election in 1916 on a platform of neutrality, faced mounting pressure. Then came the Zimmermann telegram, another German blunder. In January 1917, German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann sent a coded message to Mexico proposing an alliance. If Mexico joined the war against the U.S., Germany would help them reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. British intelligence intercepted and decoded the telegram, passing it to Wilson. The American public, already incensed by U-boat attacks, was outraged. On April 6, 1917, the U.S. declared war on Germany, bringing its vast resources and manpower to the Allied side. Germany's submarine gamble didn't break Britain. It brought a new enemy into the war. Meanwhile, Russia was unraveling. The Tsar's armies, battered by losses like Tannenberg, were demoralized, and the home front was starving. In March 1917, riots in Petrograd erupted into the February Revolution, named for Russia's old calendar. Workers, soldiers, and peasants demanded bread and peace. Tsar Nicholas II, misjudging the crisis, ordered troops to suppress the protests, but many mutinied, joining the rebels. On March 15th, Nicholas abdicated, ending 300 years of Romanov rule. The provisional government, led by Alexander Kerensky, vowed to continue the war, a decision that proved fatal. Exhausted Russians wanted out, and Kerensky's refusal to seek peace alienated his base. This opened the door for Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, who promised peace, land, and bread. In November 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power in the October Revolution. Lenin, smuggled into Russia with German help, another German miscalculation, signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918, pulling Russia out of the war. The treaty ceded vast territories to Germany, including Ukraine and the Baltic states, but it freed German troops for the Western Front. Russia's exit was a short-term German victory, but a long-term disaster. The Bolshevik Revolution sparked a civil war and established the Soviet Union, a new power that would shape the 20th century. Kerensky's decision to keep fighting and Germany's role in aiding Lenin were errors that reshaped global politics. On the Western Front, 1918 brought Germany's last gamble, the Spring Offensive. With Russia out, Germany redeployed troops west, launching a series of attacks to break the Allies before American forces arrived in full. Led by Erich Ludendorff, the offensive gained ground, pushing within 75 miles of Paris. But the Germans overextended. Supply lines stretched thin, troops were exhausted, and American reinforcements, over 1 million by mid-1918, bolstered the Allies. General John Pershing's fresh U.S. troops, unscarred by years of trench warfare, turned the tide at battles like Belleau Wood. The Allies counterattacked in the 100 Days Offensive, starting in August 1918, driving Germany back. Ludendorff's all-or-nothing strategy collapsed, a misjudgment that exhausted Germany's reserves and morale. By November 1918, Germany was crumbling. The home front faced starvation and riots, echoing Russia's collapse. Kaiser Wilhelm II, clinging to power, refused to negotiate until it was too late. On November 9th, he abdicated and Germany became a republic. 2 days later, on November 11th, the armistice was signed, ending the fighting. Over 16 million were dead, 9 million soldiers and 7 million civilians. 4 empires, Austria, Hungary, Germany, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire, lay in ruins. The war's scale was staggering. France lost 1.4 million soldiers, Britain 700,000, Germany 2 million. Entire towns were erased and survivors carried scars, physical and mental, for generations. The war's end brought one final fateful mistake: the Treaty of Versailles. Signed on June 28, 1919, exactly 5 years after the Sarajevo assassination, the treaty aimed to secure peace, but instead sowed discord. The Allies, led by France's Georges Clemenceau and Britain's David Lloyd George, imposed harsh terms on Germany. It was forced to accept sole blame for the war, cede 13% of its territory, limit its army to 100,000 troops, and pay $33 billion in reparations, about $400 billion today. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson pushed for his 14 points, a vision of fair peace, but France and Britain, scarred by the war, demanded punishment. Economist John Maynard Keynes warned the treaty was a Carthaginian peace, designed to crush Germany, not rebuild Europe. Germany's humiliation fueled resentment. Millions of ethnic Germans now lived outside its borders, in Poland and Czechoslovakia. The war guilt clause and economic burdens inflamed nationalist anger. During the Great Depression, this resentment propelled Adolf Hitler and the Nazis to power, who exploited Versailles' injustices to rally support. The treaty wasn't the sole cause of World War II, but its harshness created fertile ground for extremism. Had the Allies offered a fairer peace, Germany's path might have avoided Nazism, potentially averting another global conflict. The decision to punish rather than reconcile was a misstep with catastrophic consequences. Let's reflect on the human toll. Soldiers like Siegfried Sassoon wrote of the trenches' despair, while families mourned sons lost to futile charges. Leaders like Haig and Ludendorff, obsessed with victory, ignored the human cost. The civilians, from Belgian refugees to Russian peasants, suffered as much as soldiers. The war birthed modern warfare, tanks, planes, chemical weapons, but also modern trauma with shell shock haunting survivors. The decisions to escalate, to cling to old tactics, to prioritize pride over peace, turned a war into a tragedy of unprecedented scale. The war's legacy reshaped the world. The fall of empires gave rise to new nations like Poland and Yugoslavia, but also instability. The League of Nations, Wilson's dream to prevent future wars, was weakened by America's refusal to join and the Allies' vindictiveness. The Soviet Union's emergence set the stage for the Cold War. The Middle East, carved up by Britain and France in secret agreements like Sykes-Picot, faced decades of conflict. Every major decision, from submarines to revolutions to treaties, carried consequences that echo today. This journey began with a wrong turn in Sarajevo, a driver's mistake that gave Gavrilo Princip his shot. But it was the cascade of errors that followed: diplomatic ultimatums, military overreach, revolutionary missteps, and a vengeful peace that made World War I a global tragedy. Each choice, from Kaiser Wilhelm's blank check to the Versailles Treaty's harshness, shows how fragile history is, how one wrong decision can ripple across centuries. The war killed millions, redrew maps, and set the stage for conflicts we still grapple with. That's the end of our four-part tale. From a stalled car in Sarajevo to a treaty that fueled another war, we've seen how human error turned a single moment into a global catastrophe. Drop a comment with your thoughts. What was the war's biggest mistake, and could it have been avoided? Hit subscribe, share with a friend, and join our Discord to suggest more stories. The past is a mirror, reflecting our flaws and our potential. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one. Picture this. One man's pride, a single act of defiance, sets off a chain of events that topples an empire over 1,000 years old. His refusal to bend, his obsession with glory, and his trust in the wrong allies didn't just cost him his throne, it reshaped the world. We're diving into how one man's pride led to the fall of an empire, the story of Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI, and the catastrophic fall of Constantinople in 1453. This is a tale of hubris, betrayal, and a city caught in the crosshairs of history. Constantinople, 1453, a city of legends, the last bastion of an empire that had stood for over a millennium. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome's glory, was once the heart of the Christian world, its capital a glittering fortress of culture, faith, and power. But by the 15th century, it was a shadow of its former self, a shrinking island in a sea of rising empires. At its helm stood Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, a man whose pride, courage, and fatal decisions would bring this ancient empire to its knees. His refusal to compromise, his faith in failing allies, and his defiance against overwhelming odds didn't just end his reign, they changed the course of history. This is part one of how one man's pride led to the fall of an empire, and we're starting with a city under siege and a leader who wouldn't back down. Constantinople wasn't just a city, it was a symbol. Its massive walls, built by Emperor Theodosius II in the 5th century, had repelled invaders for centuries: Huns, Arabs, Vikings, and more. Its strategic position, straddling Europe and Asia, made it the gateway to two continents, a hub of trade and culture. The Byzantine Empire, though diminished, still carried the legacy of Rome, its emperors claiming the title of Caesar. By 1453, however, the empire was reduced to Constantinople and a few scattered territories. surrounded by the rising Ottoman Empire, a young and hungry power led by Sultan Mehmed II, a 21-year-old visionary obsessed with conquering the city. Constantine XI, in his late 40s, was no stranger to hardship. Crowned emperor in 1449, he inherited a crumbling realm. The Byzantine treasury was nearly empty, its armies depleted and its allies unreliable. The empire had been battered by centuries of invasions, crusades, and internal strife. The Fourth Crusade in 1204, when Western Christians sacked Constantinople, had left scars that never healed. Yet Constantine was a proud man, steeped in the legacy of his ancestors. He saw himself as the defender of Christendom, the last Roman emperor, tasked with preserving his city against all odds. His pride would be both his strength and his downfall. The Ottoman threat had been growing for decades. By 1453, the Ottomans controlled most of Anatolia and the Balkans, encircling Constantinople like a noose. Mehmed II, known as Mehmed the Conqueror, was driven by a dream, to make Constantinople the capital of a new Islamic empire. He was brilliant, ruthless, and ambitious, studying the city's defenses and preparing for a siege that would shake the world. In 1452, he built the Rumeli Hisar, a fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus, cutting off Constantinople's sea routes. The city was isolated, its supply lines choked, yet Constantine refused to surrender. He believed the city's walls, or his faith, and the hope of Western aid could save his empire. This was his first mistake. Let's set the scene. Constantinople in 1453 was a city of contrasts. Its population, once over 1 million, had dwindled to perhaps 50,000. The Hagia Sophia, the grand cathedral of Byzantine Christianity, still stood as a beacon of faith, but its domes were crumbling. The city's walls, though formidable, were in disrepair, and its garrison was pitifully small, around 7,000 defenders, including monks, mercenaries, and civilians. Against them stood Mehmed's army, estimated at 80,000 to 100,000, with thousands of elite janissaries, artillery, and a navy to control the Bosphorus. The odds were staggering, but Constantine's pride wouldn't let him yield. He saw surrender as a betrayal of his legacy, his faith, and his people. Before the siege began, a pivotal moment set the stage for disaster: the refusal to hire Orban, a Hungarian engineer. In 1452, Orban offered his services to Constantine, proposing to build massive cannons capable of defending the city. His designs were revolutionary, but Constantinople's treasury was bare. Constantine, unable to pay Orban's price or supply the resources needed, turned him away. This was a fatal error. Orban, undeterred, took his talents to Mehmed II, who eagerly funded him. In just 3 months, Orban built the Basilica, a monstrous cannon 27 feet long, capable of firing 600-pound stone balls over a mile. It took 60 oxen to move it, and its roar would soon shatter Constantinople's walls. Constantine's pride in rejecting Orban, born of necessity but also a belief in his city's invincibility, handed the Ottomans a weapon that would seal his doom. The siege began on April 6, 1453. Mehmed's army encircled the city, his cannons pounding the Theodosian walls. The basilica, flanked by smaller guns, fired relentlessly, targeting the weakest sections. Constantine, leading from the front, rallied his defenders with speeches of defiance. He believed the walls, which had stood for 1,000 years, could hold. He also clung to hope of aid from the West. The Byzantine Empire had long sought help from Catholic Europe, but relations were strained. The 1439 Council of Florence had attempted to unite the Catholic and Orthodox churches, but many Byzantines, including Constantine's own people, rejected the deal as a betrayal of their faith. Constantine's pride in his Orthodox heritage made him reluctant to fully embrace Catholic terms, complicating negotiations. Still, he sent desperate pleas to Venice, Genoa, and the Pope. A small contingent of 700 Genoese soldiers, led by Giovanni Giustiniani, arrived to bolster the defense, a rare success. Giustiniani, a skilled commander, became Constantine's right-hand man, organizing the city's defenses. But the promised fleets from Venice and the Pope never materialized in force. Europe was fractured. Venice and Genoa were rivals. Hungary was wary of Ottoman retaliation, and the Pope's aid came with strings attached. Constantine's faith in Western rescue was another misstep. His pride wouldn't let him see that Christendom was too divided to save him. Inside the city, morale was fragile. Constantinople's citizens, a mix of Greeks, Italians, and others, were united by fear but divided by faith and class. The Orthodox clergy accused Constantine of selling out to Catholics, while the poor resented the wealthy hoarding food. Constantine, torn between his duty as emperor and his role as a unifier, refused to compromise. He rejected Mehmed's offers of surrender, which promised safety for the city's people in exchange for handing over Constantinople. To Constantine, surrender meant the end of the Roman legacy, a dishonor he couldn't bear. His defiance inspired some but alienated others, weakening the city's resolve. Mehmed's strategy was relentless. His cannons battered the walls, his miners dug tunnels to undermine them, and his navy blockaded the harbor. On April the 20th, a small miracle gave Constantine hope. 4 Genoese ships broke through the Ottoman blockade, delivering supplies. The city cheered, but it was a fleeting victory. Mehmed, enraged, devised a bold plan. He ordered his ships dragged overland across the hills of Galata to bypass the chain blocking the Golden Horn, Constantinople's harbor. By April 22nd, Ottoman ships were inside the harbor, cutting off the city completely. Constantine's failure to anticipate this audacious move, blinded by his belief in the city's impregnability, was another costly error. The siege's early weeks tested Constantinople's defenses. Justiniani's men repaired breaches under constant bombardment, while Constantine rode along the walls, urging his troops to hold firm. The Ottomans tried everything: siege towers, ladders, even a massive wooden cannon that exploded, killing its own crew. But the basilica's relentless pounding began to tell. The walls, weakened by centuries and neglect, started to crumble. Constantine's pride kept him fighting, but his resources were dwindling. Food was scarce, ammunition scarcer. The city's defenders, outnumbered 10-1, were exhausted. Yet Constantine refused to flee or negotiate, believing his stand would inspire Christendom or cement his legacy as a martyr. This is just the beginning. In Part 1, we've seen how Constantine IX's pride, his refusal to hire Orban, his faith in failing allies, his defiance against Mehmed, set the stage for Constantinople's fall. But the siege is far from over. How did the city hold out against such odds? What other choices sealed its fate? In Part 2, we'll explore the escalating battle, the betrayals within the walls, and the decisions that pushed the Byzantine Empire to the brink. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Could Constantine have saved his city, or was its fall inevitable? Hit subscribe, and let's keep unraveling this epic tale. The past is calling, and it's got more secrets to reveal. Constantinople is a city under fire. It's May 1453, and the Ottoman army, led by the relentless Sultan Mehmed II, has surrounded the last stronghold of the Byzantine Empire. The massive basilica cannon, built by the engineer Orban after Emperor Constantine XI rejected him, pounds the ancient Theodosian walls day and night. The city's 7,000 defenders, led by Constantine and his ally Giovanni Giustiniani, are vastly outnumbered by Mehmed's 80,000-strong force. Supplies are dwindling, morale is cracking, and hope of Western aid is fading. Yet Constantine's pride, his unyielding belief in his duty as the last Roman emperor, keeps him fighting. In Part 1, we saw how his refusal to hire Orban and his trust in unreliable allies set the stage for disaster. Now, in Part 2, we're diving into the heart of the siege, the betrayals within the walls, and the decisions that pushed Constantinople closer to collapse. The siege, now in its second month, is a test of endurance. Mehmed's strategy is multifaceted. His cannons hammer the walls, his miners tunnel beneath them, and his navy controls the Golden Horn, thanks to his audacious move of dragging ships overland. Constantine, riding along the ramparts, inspires his men with speeches of defiance, but the cracks in his defense are showing. The Theodosian walls, once impregnable, are crumbling under the basilica's relentless fire. The Lycus Valley, a low point in the fortifications, is especially vulnerable, with breaches appearing faster than Justiniani's men can repair them. Constantine's pride in the city's historic defenses blinds him to their obsolescence against modern artillery. His refusal to adapt, relying on stone walls against gunpowder, was a critical misstep. Inside the city, division festers. Constantinople's population, a mix of Greeks, Venetians, and Genoese, is united by fear but fractured by faith and loyalty. The Orthodox majority distrust the Catholic defenders, especially after the 1439 Council of Florence, where Byzantine leaders grudgingly accepted union with Rome to secure Western aid. Many citizens, led by fiery monks like Gennadios Scholarios, see Constantine's reliance on Catholics like Justiniani as a betrayal of orthodoxy. Rumors spread that God has abandoned the city for its emperor's heresy. Constantine, torn between his Orthodox roots and the need for Western support, refuses to suppress these dissenters, fearing it would spark rebellion. His pride in maintaining unity, even at the cost of discipline, weakens the city's resolve. A pivotal moment comes in early May when Mehmed offers terms. Through emissaries, he promises to spare Constantinople's people and allow Constantine to rule as a vassal if the city surrenders. The offer is generous for the time: safe passage for the emperor and his court, protection for citizens, and preservation of churches. But Constantine rejects it outright. To him, surrendering Constantinople means betraying the Roman legacy, the Christian faith, and his ancestors. He reportedly declares, "To surrender the city to you is beyond my authority or anyone else's, for all of us, after taking counsel, would rather die than see it in your hands." His defiance rallies some but alienates others who see survival as preferable to martyrdom. This decision, rooted in pride, seals the city's fate. The defenders face relentless assaults. Mehmed's janissaries, elite troops trained from childhood, lead waves of attacks, supported by irregulars and cannon fire. On May 7th, a massive assault on the Lycus Valley nearly breaks through, but Justiniani's Genoese hold the line, their crossbows and armor outmatching Ottoman infantry. Constantine, fighting alongside his men, boosts morale, but the cost is high. Every defender lost is irreplaceable. Mehmed, frustrated, escalates his tactics. His miners, led by European experts, dig tunnels to collapse the walls, but Byzantine counterminers, guided by a Scotsman named John Grant, detect and destroy them with fire and flooding. These small victories keep hope alive, but they're not enough to turn the tide. A chilling omen shakes the city on May 22nd. During a religious procession, an icon of the Virgin Mary, believed to protect Constantinople, falls from its platform. The crowd sees it as a sign of divine abandonment. The next night, a lunar eclipse darkens the sky, fulfilling an old prophecy that Constantinople would fall when the moon failed. Constantine, a devout Christian, holds services in the Hagia Sophia to rally his people, but the omens deepen despair. His pride and his faith, while inspiring, can't counter the growing sense that God has turned away. He refuses to address these superstitions directly, fearing it would undermine his authority, a misjudgment that lets fear fester. Betrayal emerges as a new threat. Within the city, some Venetians and Genoese, fearing defeat, consider defecting. Rumors circulate of spies passing information to the Ottomans. The most damaging blow comes from an unlikely source: the Kirka Porta, a small gate in the Theodosian walls. On May 25th, a scout reports it was left unlocked. Whether by accident or sabotage is unclear. A small Ottoman scouting party nearly slips through before it's sealed, but the incident exposes vulnerabilities. Constantine, stretched thin, assigns trusted men to guard it, but his failure to inspect every gate himself reflects his over-reliance on subordinates. Pride in his leadership, assuming all would follow his example, leaves gaps in the defense. Mehmed, sensing weakness, plans a final assault. He spends late May reorganizing his forces, resting his janissaries, and stockpiling ammunition. On May 26th, he sends a final offer: surrender, and the city lives. Resist, and it faces total destruction. Constantine, meeting with his council, again refuses. His advisors are split. Some, like Grand Duke Lucas Notaras, urge negotiation, citing the city's dwindling supplies. Others, like Justiniani, support fighting to the end. Constantine's pride tips the scale. He believes a heroic stand will inspire Christendom or secure his place in history. This decision, noble but reckless, commits Constantinople to a fight it can't win. The defenders' exhaustion is palpable. Food is nearly gone, with citizens eating bread made from sawdust. Ammunition is so low that archers reuse Ottoman arrows. Justiniani's men, once 700 strong, are down to a few hundred, battered by constant fighting. Constantine's navy, a handful of ships, can't break the Ottoman blockade, yet he refuses to consider retreat. Stories circulate of his personal bravery, repairing walls at night, sharing rations with soldiers, but bravery can't replace resources. His pride in leading by example, while admirable, blinds him to the reality. The city is running out of time. Mehmed's cannons never stop. The basilica, though slow to reload, fires massive stones that shake the walls and the defenders' nerves. Smaller cannons target gates, while flaming arrows ignite wooden defenses. On May 27th, a breach at the Lycus Valley forces Constantine to redirect troops, thinning other sections. Justiniani warns that the walls can't hold much longer, but Constantine insists on fighting, believing a miracle is still possible. His faith in divine intervention, rooted in pride as the defender of Christendom, keeps him from facing the inevitable. As May ends, the city is a shadow of itself. The Hagia Sophia holds nightly vigils, but the pews are filled with fear as much as faith. Constantine's speeches, once stirring, now sound desperate. He writes to the Pope, Venice, and Hungary, begging for ships and soldiers, but no fleet appears on the horizon. His pride in Constantinople's legacy, its walls, its faith, its history, has become a trap. He can't see that the empire he's fighting for is already lost, its survival dependent on compromises he refuses to make. This is the tipping point. In Part 2, we've seen how Constantine's pride, rejecting surrender, ignoring dissent, trusting in failing defenses, pushed Constantinople to the edge. The siege is reaching its climax and Mehmed's final assault is coming. What decisions will seal the city's fate? Who will betray the emperor in the final hours? In Part 3, we'll explore the last stand, the fall of the walls, and the choices that ended an empire. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Could Constantine have negotiated peace, or was he right to fight? Hit subscribe, and let's keep unraveling this story. The past is a battlefield, and its lessons are still alive. The air in Constantinople is thick with dust and fear. It's late May 1453, and the Ottoman siege, led by Sultan Mehmed II, has battered the city for nearly 2 months. The Theodosian walls, once the pride of the Byzantine Empire, are crumbling under the relentless fire of the basilica cannon, a weapon Emperor Constantine XI could have had if he hadn't turned away its creator, Orban. The city's 7,000 defenders, led by Constantine and the Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani, are exhausted, outnumbered 10 to 1 by Mehmed's army. Food is gone, ammunition is scarce, and hope of Western aid has faded. Yet Constantine's pride, his unyielding belief in his duty to defend the last Roman city, keeps him fighting. In Part 2, we saw how his rejection of surrender and failure to quell dissent pushed Constantinople to the brink. Now, in Part 3, we're diving into the final stand, the betrayals that broke the city, and the decisions that ended an empire. As May 28th dawns, Mehmed prepares for a final assault. His army, rested and reorganized, is poised to overwhelm the city. He orders a day of silence, no cannon fire, no attacks, to unnerve the defenders and rally his troops. Inside Constantinople, the quiet is eerie. Constantine, sensing the end, gathers his advisors in the Blockernay Palace. The mood is grim. Grand Duke Lucas Notaras, a key noble, urges negotiation, arguing that surrender could save lives. Giustiniani, battered but loyal, insists on fighting, believing the walls can hold one more day. Constantine, torn between pragmatism and pride, chooses defiance. He declares that the city will fight to the last man, a decision rooted in his vision of himself as the guardian of Christendom. His refusal to compromise, noble but fatal, sets the stage for the final battle. That night, Constantinople holds its last great ceremony. In the Hagia Sophia, the heart of Byzantine faith, Constantine leads a procession of Orthodox and Catholic clergy, nobles and commoners. The cathedral, its mosaics glowing under candlelight, is packed with people praying for a miracle. Constantine, kneeling before the altar, weeps openly, asking forgiveness for his failures. It's a moment of unity, but it's fleeting. The Orthodox clergy, still resentful of Catholic influence, whisper of divine judgment. Constantine's pride in bridging the two faiths, hoping to secure Western aid, has failed to heal the city's divisions. His inability to suppress these tensions, a misstep driven by his desire to be a unifying emperor, leaves the defenders fractured at their most critical hour. Mehmed's assault begins before dawn on May 29th. The attack is relentless, with 3 waves designed to exhaust the defenders. First, irregular troops, mercenaries and conscripts, charge the walls, softening the defenses. They're repelled, but at a cost. Giustiniani's men, already depleted, are stretched thinner. The second wave brings Mehmed's Anatolian regulars, disciplined soldiers who nearly breach the Lycus Valley. Constantine, fighting alongside his troops, rallies them with shouts of, "For Rome! For Christ!" But the walls are buckling. The basilica has created gaps that can't be fully repaired. Constantine's reliance on the wall's historic strength, ignoring their vulnerability to gunpowder, proves a costly error. The final wave unleashes the Janissaries, Mehmed's elite shock troops. They target the breaches, climbing over bodies and rubble. Giustiniani, wounded by a crossbow bolt, holds the line but is faltering. At a critical moment, he's carried to a ship for treatment, a move that sparks panic. Some defenders, seeing their commander retreat, believe the city is lost. Constantine, desperate, takes his place at the breach, sword in hand. His pride drives him to lead from the front, but it leaves the city's command structure vulnerable. Giustiniani's absence, whether betrayal or necessity, marks a turning point. The defenders' morale crumbles and the Ottomans sense their chance. The fatal blow comes from an unexpected place, the Kirkoporta Gate. This small, forgotten entrance, previously found unlocked, is exploited again. Ottoman scouts, possibly tipped off by a traitor, discover it ajar. Whether by sabotage or negligence is unclear. A squad of Janissaries slips through, bypassing the main defenses. They raise an Ottoman flag on the walls, signaling a breach. Panic spreads among the defenders, who now face attacks from within and without. Constantine's failure to secure every gate, trusting subordinates to match his vigilance, is a misjudgment that opens the city's heart. His pride in his leadership, assuming all would follow his example, leaves a crack the Ottomans exploit. As the Janissaries pour in, Constantine makes his final stand. At the Lycus Valley, surrounded by loyal guards, he fights to hold the breach. Sources differ on his last moments, but one account says he tore off his imperial insignia, shouting, "The city is fallen and I am still alive," before charging into the fray. He vanishes in the chaos, likely cut down by Ottoman swords. His refusal to flee, driven by pride in his role as emperor, ensures his death, heroic but futile. With Constantine gone, resistance collapses. By noon on May 29, 1453, Constantinople falls. Mehmed's troops flood the city, looting homes, churches, and palaces. The Hagia Sophia is converted into a mosque, a symbol of the Ottoman triumph. The betrayal doesn't end with the gate. Lucas Notaras, who had urged surrender, tries to negotiate with Mehmed, hoping to save his family. Mehmed, initially sparing him, later executes Notaras and his sons, suspecting disloyalty. Some historians suggest Notaras may have sabotaged the defense, leaking information to secure his own survival. Whether true or not, Constantine's trust in Notaras, a man with divided loyalties, was another misstep. His pride in maintaining unity among his nobles, refusing to confront dissent, allowed potential traitors to undermine the city. The fall of Constantinople is a catastrophe. Thousands are killed or enslaved, and the city's treasures, relics, art, manuscripts are looted or destroyed. Mehmed, entering the Hagia Sophia, declares it the new capital of his empire, renaming it Istanbul. The Byzantine Empire, which had stood since the days of Constantine the Great, is gone. The loss reverberates across Europe. Christendom mourns the fall of its eastern bastion, while the Ottoman Empire rises as a global power, dominating trade and politics for centuries. Constantine's pride, while inspiring, led to decisions that doomed his city, rejecting Orban, trusting in failing walls, ignoring dissent, and refusing surrender. The human toll is heartbreaking. Citizens who survived the sack face slavery or exile. Giustiniani, wounded but alive, dies on a ship to Chios, his role in the defense forgotten by many. Mehmed, though victorious, is haunted by the cost. His army suffered heavy losses, and governing a diverse empire proves challenging. Constantine's family, scattered across Europe, fades into obscurity. His pride, rooted in duty, left a legacy of martyrdom, but also tragedy. The city's fall marks the end of the Middle Ages, ushering in an era of gunpowder, exploration, and new empires. We're almost at the end. In part 3, we've seen how Constantine's pride, fighting to the last, trusting in fractured defenses, ignoring betrayal, sealed Constantinople's fate. But what did the fall mean for the world? How did it reshape history? In Part 4, we'll explore the aftermath, the rise of the Ottoman Empire, and the lessons of Constantine's pride. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Was Constantine a hero or a fool? Hit subscribe and let's finish this journey together. The past is a warning, and its echoes are still with us. Constantinople lies in ruins. On May 29, 1453, the Ottoman army led by Sultan Mehmed II breaches the Theodosian walls, ending the Byzantine Empire after over 1,000 years. Emperor Constantine XI, driven by pride in his Roman legacy, fought to his death, refusing surrender even as his city crumbled. The Hagia Sophia is now a mosque. The streets are filled with the cries of the vanquished, and the last remnants of Rome are gone. In Part 3, we saw how Constantine's final stand, marred by betrayal and misjudgment, sealed the city's fate. Now, in Part 4, we explore the aftermath of Constantinople's fall, the rise of the Ottoman Empire, and the ripple effects of one man's pride that changed the world forever. The sack of Constantinople is brutal. For 3 days, Mehmed's troops loot the city, as was customary for a city taken by storm. Homes are ransacked, churches stripped of relics, and libraries burned, though some manuscripts are spared by Mehmed's orders. Thousands of citizens are killed, and tens of thousands are enslaved, shipped to markets across the Ottoman Empire. Women and children, once sheltered in the Hagia Sophia, are taken captive, their fates uncertain. Mehmed, entering the city on horseback, is struck by its devastation. Legend says he weeps at the Hagia Sophia, quoting a Persian poet. The spider weaves the curtains in the palace of the Caesars. His victory is complete, but the cost is staggering. His army lost perhaps 20,000 men, and the city he dreamed of ruling is a shell of its former glory. Mehmed, only 21, declares Constantinople the new capital of his empire, renaming it Istanbul. He sets about rebuilding, inviting Christians, Jews, and Muslims to repopulate the city. The Hagia Sophia becomes a mosque, but Mehmed preserves its structure, blending Byzantine and Islamic art. His vision is bold, to create a cosmopolitan capital that rivals Rome at its peak. But his triumph is rooted in Constantine's failures. The emperor's pride, rejecting Orban's cannons, trusting in outdated walls, refusing surrender, handed Mehmed the tools and opportunity to conquer. Had Constantine negotiated or secured Western aid, the city might have held out, delaying or altering the Ottoman rise. The fall of Constantinople sends shockwaves across Europe. Christendom reels at the loss of its eastern bastion, a city that had shielded Europe from invasions for centuries. The Pope calls for a crusade, but Europe is too divided. Venice and Genoa are locked in trade wars. Hungary fears Ottoman expansion, and France and England are entangled in their own conflicts. The lack of unity, which Constantine banked on for salvation, proves his fatal miscalculation. His pride in defending Christendom alone, without compromising his Orthodox faith or imperial legacy, left him isolated. Western chroniclers mourn him as a martyr, but some blame his stubbornness, arguing a deal with Mehmed could have saved lives. The geopolitical shift is profound. Istanbul becomes the heart of the Ottoman Empire, which dominates the Mediterranean, Middle East, and Balkans for centuries. The Bosphorus, now under Ottoman control, chokes off trade routes to the Black Sea, forcing Europe to seek new paths to Asia. This fuels the age of exploration. Within decades, Christopher Columbus sails west, seeking a route to India, and Vasco da Gama rounds Africa. Constantinople's fall, driven by Constantine's refusal to adapt, indirectly sparks the discovery of the Americas and the global expansion of European powers. The world's economic and cultural center shifts from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, a change rooted in one man's pride. The loss of Byzantine knowledge is another tragedy. Constantinople was a repository of ancient Greek and Roman texts, preserved through the Middle Ages. While Mehmed saves some manuscripts, many are lost in the sack. Scholars fleeing the city carry texts to Italy, sparking the Renaissance, a silver lining born of disaster. Figures like Cardinal Bessarion bring Plato and Aristotle to Florence, igniting a cultural revival. But the destruction of libraries and the dispersal of scholars reflect Constantine's failure to protect his empire's intellectual legacy. His pride in fighting rather than negotiating cost the world centuries of wisdom. The human cost is heartbreaking. Survivors of the sack face grim fates, enslavement, exile, or forced conversion. Constantine's family, including his nephews, scatter across Europe, their imperial dreams reduced to footnotes. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander, dies of his wounds, his heroism overshadowed by defeat. Lucas Notaras, the noble suspected of betrayal, meets a tragic end, his execution a reminder of the chaos within the city's ranks. Constantine himself becomes a legend. Some say he never died, but sleeps beneath Istanbul, destined to return. His pride, while inspiring myths, left his people to face the consequences of his choices. Mehmed's victory isn't without challenges. Governing a diverse empire strains his resources, and rebellions flare in the Balkans. Yet his conquest of Constantinople cements his legacy as the conqueror. The Ottoman Empire becomes a superpower, clashing with Europe in battles like Vienna in 1529. Constantinople's fall shifts the balance of power, making the Ottomans a dominant force until the 20th century. Constantine's refusal to surrender, rooted in his vision of himself as the last Roman emperor, handed Mehmed the stage to build a new empire on Byzantine ruins. Let's reflect on Constantine's pride. He wasn't a tyrant or a fool. He was a man shaped by duty, faith, and history. His refusal to hire Orban, born of poverty but also faith in his walls, gave the Ottomans their greatest weapon. His trust in Western aid, despite Europe's divisions, left him abandoned. His rejection of Mehmed's terms, driven by a belief in his divine mission, doomed his city. Each decision was a thread in a tapestry of pride, woven with courage but unraveled by reality. Historians debate whether he could have saved Constantinople. A deal with Mehmed might have preserved the city as a vassal state, but at the cost of its identity. Fleeing to rally a crusade was an option, but it would have meant abandoning his people. Constantine chose martyrdom over compromise, a choice that defines his legacy. The fall's long-term effects are vast. The Ottoman Empire's rise reshapes trade, religion, and warfare. The Renaissance, sparked by fleeing scholars, transforms Europe's culture. The age of exploration, driven by blocked trade routes, redraws the global map. The loss of Constantinople as a Christian bulwark fuels centuries of tension between East and West, echoes of which persist today. Constantine's pride, while personal, had global consequences, proving that one man's decisions can alter the course of civilizations. This is the end of our journey. From a rejected engineer to a forgotten gate, from a defiant emperor to a fallen city, we've seen how Constantine XI's pride led to the fall of the Byzantine Empire. His choices, noble, flawed, and human, turned a siege into a turning point that shaped the modern world. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Was Constantine a hero for standing his ground, or did his pride doom his people? Hit subscribe, share with a friend, and join our Discord to suggest more stories. The past is a mirror, reflecting the power and peril of human decisions. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, picture this. A ship hailed as unsinkable, a marvel of human engineering, steaming toward disaster because a single warning was ignored. The Titanic's sinking in 1912 wasn't just a tragedy. It was a turning point that exposed human hubris, changed maritime laws, and left a story etched in history. One overlooked message, one moment of overconfidence, sent over 1,500 souls to a watery grave. Buckle up, because we're diving into why ignoring a warning. Doom the Titanic, a tale of pride, missteps, and icy waters that still haunts us. April 14th, 1912. The North Atlantic is a frozen expanse, dark and deadly, hiding icebergs that lurk like silent assassins. The RMS Titanic, the largest ship in the world, slices through the waves, carrying over 2,200 passengers and crew toward New York. She's a floating palace, a symbol of human triumph, built by the White Star Line to dominate the seas. Her builders, her captain, her passengers, all believe she's unsinkable. But a single ignored warning, a fleeting moment of complacency, is about to send this marvel to the ocean floor, claiming lives and shattering myths. This is part 1 of why ignoring a warning. Doom the Titanic, and we're starting with a ship steaming toward catastrophe, and a crew too confident to see it coming. The Titanic was no ordinary vessel. Launched in 1911 from Belfast's Harland and Wolff shipyard, she was a colossus. 882 feet long, 9 decks high, with a gross tonnage of 46,000. Her interiors were a marvel. Grand staircases, gilded dining rooms, electric elevators, even a Turkish bath. She carried the elite, millionaires like John Jacob Astor IV, socialites like Margaret Brown, and immigrants dreaming of a new life in America. The White Star Line, led by Chairman J. Bruce Ismay, marketed her as the pinnacle of luxury and safety. Her hull, divided into 16 watertight compartments, was designed to stay afloat even if 4 flooded. Advertisements didn't call her unsinkable outright, but the press and public did, and White Star didn't correct them. This aura of invincibility set the stage for disaster. At the helm was Captain Edward Smith, a 62-year-old veteran with 40 years at sea. Known as the Millionaire's Captain, Smith was a steady hand, trusted by White Star to command their flagship. But beneath his calm exterior lay a fatal flaw: overconfidence. The early 20th century was an era of optimism, with technology promising to conquer nature. Ships like the Titanic were seen as triumphs over the sea's dangers. Icebergs were a known risk in the North Atlantic, but steamships had navigated those waters for decades. Smith, like many captains, believed speed and vigilance could outmatch any threat. This mindset, shared by his crew and the shipping industry, was the first crack in the Titanic's fate. The voyage began on April 10th, 1912, from Southampton, England, with stops in Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland, before heading across the Atlantic. The Titanic carried 2,224 people, 1,317 passengers, and 907 crew. Her lifeboats, numbering 20, could hold only 1,178, enough for barely half on board. This wasn't unusual. Maritime regulations, outdated and based on smaller ships, required lifeboats for just 1,060. White Star exceeded this, but not by enough. The belief was that lifeboats were for ferrying passengers to rescue ships, not saving everyone. After all, the Titanic was unsinkable, or so they thought. This miscalculation, rooted in industry complacency, left the ship woefully unprepared. As the Titanic steamed west, the North Atlantic was unusually perilous. The winter of 1912 had been mild, causing more icebergs to drift south into shipping lanes. Other ships, like the Californian and the Mesaba, were already in the region, sending warnings via wireless telegraphy, a new technology that allowed ships to communicate over hundreds of miles. The Titanic's wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, worked for the Marconi Company, not White Star, and their primary job was relaying passenger messages, stock updates, dinner plans, love notes. Safety warnings from other ships were secondary, often treated as interruptions. This setup, prioritizing profit over precaution, was another fatal flaw. On April 14th, the Titanic received multiple ice warnings. At 9 a.m., the Coronia reported bergs, growlers, and field ice at 42 degrees north, directly in the Titanic's path. At 1:42 p.m., the Baltic warned of large quantities of field ice about 250 miles ahead. The America and the Nordam sent similar alerts. These messages were noted by the bridge, but Captain Smith maintained full speed, about 22 knots, nearly 25 miles per hour. This was standard practice. Liners competed for speed records, and slowing down could delay arrival, disappointing passengers and shareholders. Smith, trusting in the ship's design and his lookouts, saw no need to slow. His decision to ignore the warning's urgency was the first in a chain of errors. The Titanic's bridge was a hub of confidence. Officers like First Officer William Murdoch and Second Officer Charles Lightoller relied on lookouts in the Crow's Nest, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, to spot dangers. But the Crow's Nest had a problem: no binoculars. The binoculars meant for the lookouts were locked in a cabinet, and the key was with an officer left behind in Southampton. This wasn't seen as critical. Lookouts typically used their eyes to spot hazards, then binoculars to confirm. Still, the absence of binoculars, a small oversight by the crew, would prove costly in the dark, moonless night ahead. By evening, the temperature was dropping, a sign of nearby ice. At 5:50 p.m., Smith slightly altered course southward, a nod to the warnings, but kept speed at 22 knots. At 7:30 p.m., the Californian, just 20 miles away, sent a warning. 3 large bergs at 42 degrees north. Phillips, swamped with passenger messages, acknowledged it curtly. At 9:40 p.m., the Masaba sent a chilling message. Ice field ahead, latitude 41.25 to 42.5, longitude 49 to 50.30. This pinpointed a massive ice field directly in the Titanic's path. Phillips, overwhelmed, didn't relay it to the bridge. He was busy sending a passenger's telegram. This failure to prioritize the warning, driven by the Marconi system's commercial focus, was a critical misstep. At 10:55 p.m., the Californian sent another warning. We are stopped and surrounded by ice. Phillips, frustrated, snapped back. Shut up! I'm working Cape Race, referring to a relay station for passenger messages. The Californian's operator, Cyril Evans, turned off his set and went to bed. This exchange, born of stress and misplaced priorities, silenced a nearby ship that could have saved lives. The Californian, less than 20 miles away, was the closest vessel when disaster struck. Phillips's dismissal of the warning and Evans' decision to shut down cut off a lifeline. On the bridge, the mood was calm but tense. Lookouts, Fleet and Lee, perched in the crow's nest, strained to see in the pitch-black night. The sea was flat, offering no waves to break against icebergs, a natural warning sign. At 11:40 p.m., Fleet spotted a dark shape ahead. He rang the bell 3 times, danger, and phoned the bridge. Iceberg, right ahead. Murdoch, on duty, ordered hard a starboard and full stop, but it was too late. The Titanic, moving at nearly full speed, grazed the iceberg's submerged spur. The impact seemed minor, a grinding noise, a shudder, but it tore a 300-foot gash across 5 compartments. Water poured in, more than the ship could handle. Smith, summoned to the bridge, realized the unsinkable Titanic was doomed. This is just the beginning. In part 1, we've seen how the Titanic's fate was shaped by overconfidence, ignoring ice warnings, prioritizing speed, neglecting lifeboats, and missing binoculars. But the disaster is only starting. How did the crew's decisions in those critical hours seal the tragedy? What choices turned a collision into a catastrophe? In part 2, we'll dive into the evacuation, the chaos on deck, and the missteps that cost lives. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Could the Titanic have avoided the iceberg? Hit subscribe, and let's keep unraveling this story. The past is a warning, and its lessons are waiting. The Titanic is dying. It's April 14th, 1912, just past 11:40 p.m., and the unthinkable has happened. The unsinkable ship has struck an iceberg, tearing a 300-foot gash across 5 watertight compartments. Water surges in, overwhelming the pumps, and the bow is dipping lower by the minute. Captain Edward Smith, stunned but resolute, orders an assessment. Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, delivers the grim truth. The Titanic will sink in 1 to 2 hours, and there aren't enough lifeboats for half the 2,224 people on board. In part 1, we saw how ignored ice warnings and overconfidence set the stage for disaster. Now, in part 2, we're diving into the chaotic evacuation, the critical errors in the lifeboat launch, and the human choices that turned a collision into a catastrophe. Captain Smith, a 40-year veteran, faces the worst moment of his career. At 12:05 a.m. on April 15th, he orders the lifeboats uncovered and the crew to muster passengers. The Titanic has 20 lifeboats, 16 wooden boats, and 4 collapsible rafts, enough for 1,178 people, barely half the ship's total. This shortage, rooted in outdated regulations and the belief that lifeboats were for ferrying to rescue ships, is already a fatal flaw. But the evacuation compounds the tragedy. Smith's first order, women and children first, is standard maritime practice, but its execution is inconsistent. Officers on the starboard side, led by First Officer William Murdoch, interpret it loosely, allowing men if space remains. On the port side, Second Officer Charles Lightoller enforces it strictly, turning away men even when boats are half empty. This lack of clarity, born of Smith's failure to issue precise protocols, sows confusion from the start. The crew is unprepared for a full evacuation. Many sailors, hired just days before, don't know the lifeboat stations. Drills were minimal. Only one partial lifeboat drill occurred in Southampton, and it didn't involve passengers. The Titanic's officers, trained for navigation, not crisis management, struggled to coordinate. Passengers, roused from their cabins, are reluctant to leave the warm, brightly lit ship for flimsy boats on a freezing sea. The band, led by Wallace Hartley, begins playing ragtime tunes to keep spirits up, a haunting act of calm amid chaos. Smith's decision to maintain order rather than urgency, hoping to avoid panic, delays the evacuation. His pride in the Titanic's image, even now, slows the response. At 12:15 a.m., wireless operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride send the first distress call. CQD, Titanic struck iceberg sinking. They use the new SOS signal too, a cry for help heard by ships across the Atlantic. The Carpathia, 58 miles away, responds immediately, steaming at full speed, but it won't arrive for 4 hours. The Californian, less than 20 miles away, is silent. Its operator, Cyril Evans, shut down his set after Phillips's earlier rebuff. This missed connection, a consequence of Phillips' dismissal of the Californian's ice warning, leaves the Titanic without its closest savior. Smith, unaware of the Californian's proximity, pins his hopes on distant ships, a misjudgment that costs precious time. The lifeboat launch is a study in chaos. At 12:25 a.m., the first boat, Lifeboat 7, is lowered from the starboard side with only 28 people, despite a capacity of 65. Wealthy passengers like Margaret Brown and Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon board early, but many boats leave half full. Lightoller, on the port side, insists on women and children only, turning away men even when no women are present. Lifeboat 6 carries just 24 people, including Molly Brown, who later helps row. Murdoch, more flexible, fills boats faster but still launches some under capacity. The crew's lack of training and Smith's failure to enforce a clear loading strategy waste critical space. By 1 a.m., it's clear not everyone will get a seat, yet many passengers still believe the ship won't sink. Class divides the evacuation. First-class passengers, housed near the boat deck, have easier access to lifeboats. Third-class passengers, below decks, face locked gates and language barriers. Stewards, unsure how to guide immigrants speaking Italian, Polish, or Arabic, leave many trapped in steerage. Some gates are locked to maintain order, a decision rooted in Edwardian class hierarchy. By the time third-class passengers reach the deck, many boats are gone. Of the 709 third-class passengers, only 174 survive. First-class men, like John Jacob Astor IV, fare better. Some board boats when space allows. This disparity, a result of poor planning and societal bias, amplifies the tragedy. At 1:15 a.m., the Titanic's bow dips further and panic sets in. The band switches to hymns, their music a poignant backdrop to the growing chaos. Lifeboat 1, carrying Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon and his wife, leaves with just 12 people, sparking later accusations of bribery to avoid returning for survivors. Collapsible C, launched around 1:40 a.m., carries White Star chairman J. Bruce Ismay, who slips aboard as it's lowered. His decision to save himself, while defensible in the moment, haunts him later, as critics brand him a coward. Smith, meanwhile, is seen pacing the bridge, issuing orders but showing signs of shock. His failure to take direct control of the evacuation, relying on officers with conflicting approaches, lets the chaos spiral. The distress signals grow desperate. Phillips and Bride work tirelessly, sending SOS to any ship in range. Flares rocket into the sky, but the Californian, its officers seeing the lights, debates whether they're distress signals or celebration fireworks. Captain Stanley Lord, cautious and unsure, orders his crew to monitor but not act, assuming the Titanic is too large to be in danger. This hesitation, born of Lord's misjudgment in the earlier radio silence, leaves the Californian idle while the Titanic sinks. Had Lord acted, hundreds might have been saved. The failure to respond is a second missed lifeline, compounding Phillips' earlier dismissal. By 2 a.m., the last lifeboats are leaving. Collapsible D with 44 people is lowered as water laps the boat deck. Collapsible A and B, the last rafts, are swamped or cut free, leaving dozens clinging to them in the freezing sea. Passengers now crowd the stern, which rises as the bow sinks. Smith is last seen near the bridge, reportedly telling crew to do your best for the women and children and look out for yourselves. Some say he went down with the ship. Others claim he swam to a lifeboat but refused to place. His pride tying him to the Titanic's fate, leaves his final moments a mystery. The human cost is staggering. Families are torn apart. Wives board lifeboats while husbands stay behind, promising to meet in New York. Ida Strauss, wife of Macy's owner Isidore Strauss, refuses to leave her husband, choosing to die together. Children from third class, like the Goodwin family's 6 siblings, perish with their parents, lost in the maze below decks. Crew members, from stokers to stewards, work until the end, keeping lights on and boilers running. The band plays Nearer My God to Thee, a final act of courage. These stories, born of chaos and sacrifice, show the human heart amid disaster. We're halfway through the tragedy. In part 2, we've seen how the Titanic's evacuation turned a collision into a catastrophe. Through inconsistent orders, untrained crew, class divides, and missed rescues. But the worst is yet to come. How did the final moments unfold? What happened to those left behind? In part 3, we'll explore the ship's last plunge, the fate of the survivors, and the errors that sealed the toll. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Could better leadership have saved more lives? Hit subscribe, and let's keep unraveling this story. The past is calling, and its lessons are chilling. The Titanic is sinking fast. It's April 15th, 1912, just past 2 a.m., and the North Atlantic's icy grip is tightening. The ship's bow is submerged, her stern rising as water floods 5 watertight compartments, more than she was designed to survive. Only 2 lifeboats remain, and over 1,500 people are still on board, with no room left to save them. Captain Edward Smith, his officers, and the crew struggle in chaos, while the passengers face impossible choices: a jump into the freezing sea or cling to a doomed ship. In part 2, we saw how a chaotic evacuation, marked by inconsistent orders and class divides, wasted precious lifeboat space. Now, in part 3, we're diving into the Titanic's final moments, the fate of those left behind, and the missteps that sealed one of history's greatest tragedies. The boat deck is a scene of desperation. The last 2 lifeboats, Collapsible A and B, are being prepared under panic. Collapsible A, partially swamped, is cut free and floats off with dozens clinging to its sides, many of whom will freeze in the 28-degree water. Collapsible B is overturned as it's launched, leaving passengers like Second Officer Charles Littler scrambling onto its upturned hull. The Titanic's stern now towers at a 45-degree angle, her lights still blazing thanks to engineers keeping the boilers running. The band, led by Wallace Hartley, plays hymns until the end, their final notes drowned by the roar of water and screams. This bravery, amid a failure to save more lives, is a haunting contrast. Captain Smith's leadership falters in these final minutes. Seen near the bridge, he issues no clear orders to abandon ship, leaving officers and crew to act on their own. Some, like 5th Officer Harold Lowe, return in lifeboats to rescue swimmers, saving a handful. Others, like Chief Baker Charles Joan, survive by clinging to debris, aided by whiskey that kept him warm. But most crew members, from stokers to stewards, stay at their posts, ensuring lights and pumps run until the end. Smith's failure to centralize command, rooted in his trust in the Titanic's systems and his crew's initiative, leaves the evacuation fragmented. His pride in the ship, even as it sinks, costs precious time and lives. The passengers' fates are heart-wrenching. First-class men like John Jacob Astor IV, denied lifeboat seats, stand resolute, bidding farewell to their wives. Astor, one of the richest men aboard, reportedly quips, "I asked for ice, but this is ridiculous," before stepping back. Third-class passengers, trapped below decks by locked gates and language barriers, face the worst odds. Families like the Goodwins, parents and 6 children, perish together, unable to navigate the ship's maze. Stories of sacrifice emerge. Ida Strauss refuses to leave her husband Isidore, saying, "Where you go, I go." These moments of humanity shine through the chaos, but they underscore the tragedy of a botched evacuation. At 2:18 a.m., the Titanic's lights flicker and die. The ship's structure groans as the bow pulls the stern higher. The forward funnel collapses, crushing swimmers and sending a wave that pushes Collapsible B further away. The ship splits in 2, a fact hidden from survivors until the wreck's discovery in 1985. The bow plunges downward, dragging hundreds into the depths. The stern, briefly leveling, fills with water and sinks at 2:20 a.m., leaving a whirlpool of debris and bodies. Those in the water without lifebelts or boats face hypothermia. Most die within 15 minutes in the freezing sea. The silence that follows, broken only by cries for help, is chilling. In the lifeboats, survivors face their own horrors. Lifeboat 6, with Margaret Brown, rows away, fearing suction from the sinking ship. Brown urges a return to pick up survivors, but the crewman refuses, citing danger. Other boats, like Lifeboat 1 with only 12 aboard, stay clear, haunted by fears of being swamped. Fifth Officer Lowe, in Lifeboat 14, organizes a rescue, tying boats together to free his for a search. He saves 4 men, but arrives too late for most. The decision by many lifeboat crews to stay away, driven by fear rather than callousness, leaves hundreds to die in the water. This hesitation, born of poor training and unclear orders, amplifies the death toll. The Californian, less than 20 miles away, remains a tragic what if. Its officers, spotting the Titanic's flares, debate their meaning. Captain Stanley Lord, cautious and skeptical, assumes their company signals, not distress. He orders his crew to watch, but not wake the wireless operator, Cyril Evans, who could have confirmed the emergency. Lord's inaction, rooted in a misjudgment of the Titanic's size and invincibility, is a critical failure. Had the Californian steamed toward the flares, it could have reached the Titanic in under an hour, potentially saving hundreds. The earlier radio clash, when Titanic's Jack Phillips told Evans to shut up, haunts this moment, a chain of errors that cuts off a lifeline. The Carpathia, 58 miles away, is the Titanic's only hope. Captain Arthur Rostron, alerted by distress calls at 12:35 a.m., pushes his ship to 17 knots, dodging icebergs in the dark. His crew prepares blankets, hot drinks, and medical supplies, a model of decisive action. But the Carpathia won't arrive until 3:30 a.m., too late for those in the water. Rostron's heroism contrasts with the Titanic's failures, Smith's lack of clear orders, the crew's uneven lifeboat handling, and the Californian's inaction. The Carpathia's effort, though valiant, can't undo the earlier missteps that left so many stranded. The human stories in these final moments are gut-wrenching. Violet Jessup, a stewardess, survives in Lifeboat 16, later recalling the dreadful, beautiful sound of the band's last hymn. Archibald Gracie, a first-class passenger, clings to collapsible B, his hands frozen to the ropes. Charles Jowan, the baker, rides the stern like a slide, surviving hours in the water thanks to his lifebelt and liquor-fueled warmth. But for every survivor, dozens perish, children, families, crew, who might have lived with more boats or better decisions. The third-class death toll, over 75%, reflects the cruel hierarchy of the evacuation, a legacy of societal bias and poor planning. The sea grows quiet as the cries fade. Lifeboats drift, their occupants shivering under the stars. Some, like Margaret Brown, take charge, organizing rowing or comforting the distraught. Others, like J. Bruce Ismay, sit silently, grappling with their survival. The Titanic's wreck lies 12,500 feet below, broken in two, its grandeur reduced to twisted steel. The survivors, scattered across 20 lifeboats, face a long wait, their minds replaying the chaos. The decisions, Smith's delay, the crew's inconsistency, the Californian's hesitation, have turned a survivable collision into a disaster of unimaginable scale. We're nearing the end. In Part 3, we've seen the Titanic's final plunge, marked by heroic sacrifices, panicked errors, and missed rescues. But what happened to the survivors? How did the world react to this tragedy? In Part 4, we'll explore the Carpathia's rescue, the inquiries that followed, and the lasting impact of a warning ignored. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Could more lives have been saved in those final moments? Hit subscribe, and let's finish this journey together. The past is a lesson, and its echoes are still with us. The North Atlantic is silent, save for the lapping of waves against lifeboats. It's April 15th, 1912, just past 2:20 a.m., and the Titanic has vanished beneath the sea, leaving over 1,500 dead and 706 survivors scattered across 20 lifeboats. The water, a frigid 28 degrees, has claimed most of those left behind, their cries fading into the night. The Carpathia, steaming through iceberg-laden waters, is the only hope for those in the boats, but the world is about to learn the cost of a warning ignored. In Part 3, We saw the Titanic's final plunge, marked by sacrifice, chaos, and missed rescues. Now, in part 4, we dive into the rescue, the inquiries that followed, and the lasting impact of a tragedy born of human hubris. At 3:30 a.m., the Carpathia's crew spots the first green flare from Lifeboat 2, signaling survivors. Captain Arthur Rostron, who pushed his ship to 17 knots through dangerous waters, directs a meticulous rescue. By 4 a.m., the first lifeboat, carrying shivering passengers, reaches the Carpathia. Over the next 4 hours, Rostron's crew hauls 706 people aboard, providing blankets, coffee, and medical care. Margaret Brown, later dubbed the unsinkable Molly Brown, organizes aid, comforting women who lost husbands and children. The Carpathia's heroism stands in stark contrast to the Titanic's failures, but it can't erase the loss. Of the 2,224 aboard the Titanic, only 31% survive. Third-class passengers fare worst, with 75% perishing, while 60% of first-class passengers survive, a grim reflection of the evacuation's class bias. The survivors' stories are heart-wrenching. Violet Jessup, a stewardess, recalls the eerie calm of the band's final hymn. Archibald Gracie, clinging to an upturned collapsible, suffers frostbite but survives to write a book about the disaster. Charles Jaugen, the baker, credits whiskey in his lifebelt for enduring hours in the water. But the losses dominate. Entire families, like the Goodwins, are gone. John Jacob Astor IV, Ida and Isidore Strauss, and countless third-class children perish, their dreams of America drowned. J. Bruce Ismay, White Star's chairman, faces scorn for boarding a lifeboat, his survival branded as cowardice. Captain Edward Smith, likely lost with the ship, becomes a symbol of duty and failure. The Carpathia steams to New York, arriving on April 18th to a stunned world. Thousands line the docks, desperate for news. Newspapers, initially reporting all were saved, correct their stories as the death toll emerges. The loss of 1,518 lives, 1,503 passengers and crew, plus 15 who die later, shocks the globe. The Titanic, hailed as unsinkable, has exposed the fragility of human ambition. The world demands answers. Why were ice warnings ignored? Why so few lifeboats? Why did the Californian, just 20 miles away, do nothing? 2 inquiries, one American, one British, aim to uncover the truth, but they also reveal a web of errors and excuses. The U.S. Senate inquiry led by Senator William Alden Smith begins days after the Carpathia's arrival. Over 80 witnesses, including survivors, crew, and White Star officials, testify. Senator Smith, no relation to the captain, probes the Titanic's speed, lifeboat shortage, and the Californians' inaction. Wireless operator Harold Bride admits Jack Phillips dismissed the Californians' warning, prioritizing passenger messages. Lightoller defends the crew's actions but concedes the lifeboat chaos. Ismay, grilled about his role, insists he had no influence over speed, though evidence suggests he urged Captain Smith to maintain 22 knots to impress shareholders. The inquiry finds Smith's decision to ignore ice warnings a key factor, but no one is criminally charged. The lack of lifeboats tied to outdated regulations draws fierce criticism. The British inquiry, led by Lord Mersey, follows in May 1912, echoing the American findings but softer on White Star. It blames Captain Smith for excessive speed and poor evacuation planning, but praises the crew's bravery. The Californian's Captain Stanley Lord faces scrutiny for failing to respond to flares. Lord claims he thought they were company signals, not distress, but survivors like Lightoller contradict him, noting the Titanic's rockets were unmistakable. The inquiry censures Lord, but imposes no punishment, a decision that sparks debate for decades. Both inquiries expose a truth. The Titanic's sinking was a chain of errors, ignoring warnings, inadequate lifeboats, and the Californians' hesitation, all rooted in overconfidence. The aftermath reshapes maritime safety. The 1912 disaster prompts the first international convention for the safety of life at sea in 1914. New rules mandate lifeboats for all passengers, 24-hour wireless operations, and ice patrols in the North Atlantic. The U.S. Coast Guard's International Ice Patrol, still active today, monitors icebergs to prevent another Titanic. Ship designs change, with double hulls and higher watertight compartments becoming standard. Wireless operators are retrained to prioritize safety messages, and SOS becomes the universal distress signal. These reforms, born of tragedy, save countless lives in the decades that follow. The Titanic's cultural impact is profound. Books, films, and songs immortalize the story, from 1912's The Wreck of the Titanic to James Cameron's 1997 blockbuster. The disaster becomes a cautionary tale of human hubris, challenging the era's blind faith in technology. Survivors like Margaret Brown become icons, while the lost, like the band, who played to the end, are lionized as heroes. The wreck, discovered in 1985 by Robert Ballard at 12,500 feet, reignites fascination, revealing the ship's broken hull and scattered artifacts. Expeditions recover items, dishes, jewelry, a child's shoe, each a reminder of lives cut short. The Titanic's story, fueled by one ignored warning, becomes a global metaphor for pride's peril. The human element lingers. Families mourn loved ones with memorials erected in New York, Belfast, and Southampton. The White Star Line, bankrupted by lawsuits, merges with Cunard. Ismay retires in disgrace, haunted by his survival. Captain Lord, vilified, spends his life defending his actions. The crew's sacrifices, engineers keeping lights on, stewards guiding passengers, highlight courage amid chaos. The third-class toll, with entire communities lost, exposes the era's inequality. The Titanic's sinking, triggered by a dismissed warning from the Masaba, reveals how small choices ripple into catastrophe. The legacy endures. The Titanic's wreck, preserved as a UNESCO site, is a time capsule of 1912. Its story shapes how we view risk, from maritime safety to modern engineering. The ignored warnings, 6 ice reports on April 14th, reflect a mindset that assumed nature could be conquered. Captain Smith's faith in the ship, the crew's untrained response, the Californians' inaction, and the lifeboat shortage all stem from this hubris. The inquiries, though flawed, force accountability, proving that even tragedy can drive change. The Titanic's fall, like Icarus's, warns us, ignore the signs at your peril. This is the end of our journey. From a missed ice warning to a ship lost in the deep, we've seen how one decision, ignoring the Masaba's alert, cascaded into disaster. The Titanic's sinking, with its 1,518 lives lost, changed laws, culture, and our view of progress. Drop a comment with your thoughts. What was the biggest mistake, and could it have been avoided? Hit subscribe, share with a friend, and join our Discord to suggest more stories. The past is a mirror, reflecting our flaws and our resilience. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.